Chapter 3340. Uncle Gu. Saint Aunt Yao looked at the white-haired old man with a bitter face. She wanted to say something, but stopped herself. That gentle, refined, and spirited expert from back then had now become like this. She knew that the pain the old man had suffered all these years was 100 times, no, 1,000 times worse than hers. Just as her emotions fluctuated, her great Tao began to show signs of backlash. Her body shook slightly. Saint Aunt Yao closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened her eyes again, her expression was normal. Her eyes were like an ancient well without any ripples. Mountain Elder smiled and said, "Go back, Aunt Yao. It's okay to be called an old thing. I don't care at my age." "But I care," Saint Aunt Yao said. "When we were young, other than Mother, you were the only one who always accompanied me in Yanji. You were the best to us. No matter how much trouble we caused, you were never angry. You always looked at us and smiled. When Mother punished us, we ran to your place to hide. You have always protected us and never let us suffer the slightest grievance." Saint Aunt Yao was expressionless. Her tone was calm, as if she was talking about something that had nothing to do with her. However, everyone could hear the emotions in her words. Mountain Elder seemed to have thought of something. He was moved. His eyes reddened as he murmured, "It's all in the past." "Uncle Gu, you're my most respected relative," Saint Aunt Yao said slowly. "As long as I'm alive, I won't allow anyone to be disrespectful to you." The last sentence clearly had a hidden meaning. The 9 heavens saints frowned upon hearing this. Great Sky Saint coughed and said, "Taoist Aunt Yao, we also respect Mountain Elder very much. We just agreed to let him leave with the humans. We didn't make things difficult for him." "That's right," Firmament Saint said in a deep voice. "This Araki Takashi isn't human. He once worked with the masters of the 4 paths in the middle world to break the heavenly court's blockade of the 5 sacred grounds. The resurgence of the evil demons and dark ghosts in the Great Thousand World is all because of this person. We only want to kill this person." His words sounded reasonable and reasonable. Saint Gu Yao wanted to stand up for the Mountain Elder, but the 9 heaven saints had already compromised and did not stop the Mountain Elder and the other supremes from leaving. "That won't do either," Saint Gu Yao said calmly. "Why is that?" Heavenly Saint Jun Tian frowned and questioned. "Araki Takashi is obviously on the same side as the masters of the 4 paths. He has also inherited the Chaos Sacred Grounds inheritance. If we let him go, he will become a huge threat in the future." Saint Gu Yao said, "If Mountain Elder wants to take him away, no one can stop him." This reason seemed to be correct, but there seemed to be something wrong. Dayu glanced sideways at Su Zimo with a deep gaze. This Saint Gu Yao indeed wanted to help the Mountain Elder, but it seemed that the boundary of her help was a little too big. The Firmament Sage was so angry that he laughed and said loudly, "Taoist Gu Yao, what are you talking about? This Araki Takashi has broken the Heaven Court and is entangled with the 4 Daos. His crimes are unforgivable. Even if the ancestral Flame Saint Lord is here, he won't stop us." Saint Gu Yao glared at him and said coldly, "Are you trying to use him to pressure me?" As soon as she finished speaking, Saint Gu Yao suddenly attacked. Her saint aura was boundless, and the great Tao manifested, suppressing the Firmament Sage. "You!" The Firmament Sage was shocked. He didn't expect that a single sentence from him would cause Saint Gu Yao to attack him. The Firmament Sage had mentioned the Ancestral Flame Saint Lord because he wanted to use the Ancestral Flame Saint's name to pressure Saint Gu Yao. After all, the Ancestral Flame Saint Lord was Saint Gu Yao's father. However, there was already a rift between the father and daughter, and they had been at odds for many years. When the Firmament Sage mentioned the Ancestral Flame Saint Lord, it immediately reminded Saint Gu Yao of the past, and it made her angry and murderous. Boom! The 2 saint auras collided, and a loud explosion erupted. Even the forbidden land of time and space started to tremble slightly. The Firmament Sage was no match for Saint Gu Yao. He took a few steps back, and the blood in his body started to boil. His expression changed slightly. Saint Gu Yao's combat strength was much stronger than he had imagined. Saint Juantian's divine consciousness moved, and he was ready to unleash his saint aura to kill Araki Takashi. However, Saint Guyao sensed it, and she attacked again. She fought against the two saints, Juntian and Firmament. Boom, boom, boom. The two sides continued to exchange blows, and their saint auras clashed. Saint Guyao had the upper hand, even though she was fighting against two saints. We will stop her. You guys kill Araki Takeshi first. Saint Juntian said in a deep voice. Who dares? Saint Guyao shouted. Her chi blood surged, and she was bathed in flames. She waved her hands and saint auras gushed out, enveloping all the saints of the 9 heavens. Saint Guyao was so powerful that she wanted to fight against 9 saints of the 9 heavens. Rumble. The battle between the 10 saints shook the heavens and earth, and the clouds changed color. Under the saint aura, the paragons of all races trembled. Once paragons were involved in a battle of this level, they would be instantly turned into dust. The great Tao that they controlled was like child's play in front of the saints. Let's go. The mountain elder reacted immediately when he saw this. He led Suzimo, Night Spirit, and the others toward the nearest spatial node. The saints of the 9 heavens were anxious when they saw this, and their attacks became even more ferocious. However, even with the 9 of them working together, they were still unable to break through Saint Guyao's blockade in a short time. On one hand, Saint Guyao's combat strength was indeed powerful, and she was more powerful than the saints of the 9 heavens. On the other hand, Saint Guyao was the daughter of the ancestral flame sacred leader, and the saints of the 9 heavens were wary of her. Flaming Sky Sage was even more helpless in front of her. Nonsense! At this moment, a majestic voice reverberated throughout the forbidden land of time and space. It was deafening, not to mention the saints of the forbidden land of time and space. Even the beings of the great thousand world, who were watching the battle, could not help but tremble when they heard this voice through the spatial node. In the next moment, a suffocating pressure appeared in the forbidden land of time and space. All the beings in this world, including the saints of the 9 heavens who were fighting, were suppressed to the point that they could not move. The saints of the 9 heavens were shocked. A great sage. Only great sages could have this kind of might and power. This pressure did not seem to restrict Saint Guyao's movements. Saint Guyao was expressionless as she looked at the 9 motionless saints not far away. She attacked again without any intention of holding back. That's enough. Accompanied by a soft shout, a red-haired man with flames burning all over his body suddenly appeared in front of Saint Guyao. He had a majestic expression as he gently raised his hand and pressed Saint Guyao down. How long are you going to cause trouble? The red-haired man looked at Saint Guyao and asked slowly. You have no right to control me. Saint Guyao's tone was cold. I'm your father. The red-haired man's eyes suddenly lit up with 2 balls of flames as he shouted. All the beings of the 10,000 races were shocked. The sacred lord of ancestral flame had appeared. So what? Saint Guyao's expression was still cold, as she looked at the sacred lord of ancestral flame, without any emotion. She said indifferently, You have no right to control me from the moment you force my mother to her death. End of chapter. Chapter 3341. Everyone was in an uproar. In the forbidden land of time and space, apart from a few people who had experienced that great upheaval, and the various sages, no one else knew about this secret past. Now that Saint Guyao had said it in public, one could imagine the shock it caused. The supremes of the 10,000 races looked at the ancestral flame, sacred leader differently. What nonsense are you talking about? The ancestral flame sacred leader was furious. His face was red, and he clenched his fists tightly. Heaven and earth trembled slightly under his loud shout. This matter had always been a taboo in the great thousand world, and no one dared to mention it. Now that Saint Guyao had suddenly mentioned it in front of the 10,000 races, one could imagine the anger in the ancestral flame sacred leader's heart. It was to the extent that he lost his composure in front of the 10,000 races. This was a huge blow to his dignity, and the ancestral flame sacred ground's face. No matter what secrets there were back then, it was not a glorious thing to force one's Tao partner to death. Such a thing actually happened. Sigh. Her mother was forced to death by her father. Saint Guyao is also a pitiful person. After all, she was his Tao partner. How could he do such a thing? Some of the supremes in the forbidden land of time, and space secretly communicated with their divine consciousnesses. However, these divine consciousnesses could not be hidden from the ancestral flame sacred leader's senses at all. How dare you criticize a sage? This is unforgivable, the ancestral flame sacred leader shouted, and his sage aura descended. In an instant, more than 50,000 supremes in the forbidden land of time and space were set ablaze. In the blink of an eye, more than 50,000 supremes had all died. Among them, some were even from the 5 sacred grounds. The crowd fell into chaos and fled in all directions. Hiss! The beings of the myriad races gasped in shock. They did not even dare to criticize, let alone talk about it. The battle between the Supremes had been so tragic, and the number of Supremes who had died was less than 50,000. Now, more than 50,000 Supremes had been turned into ashes in the blink of an eye by the ancestral flame sacred leader. Everyone below the sage level was an ant. Moreover, this was the sacred leader's anger. Seeing the deaths of the sacred grounds people, the 9 heavens sages were silent. With their cultivation realm and status, they naturally did not dare to question the ancestral flame sacred leader. The ancestral flame sacred lord looked around. Wherever his gaze landed, all living beings bowed their heads and kept quiet out of fear. No one dared to look him in the eye. In the end, his gaze landed on Saint Guyao. What? You still want to kill me? Saint Guyao looked at the enraged ancestral flame sacred lord and sneered. Impudent! The sacred lord suddenly raised his hand and slapped Saint Guyao's face. Pa! Saint Guyao was hit so hard that blood flowed from the corner of her mouth, but she didn't notice it. She looked at the ancestral flame sacred lord with a mocking gaze. Vermilion bird. Seeing this scene, the mountain chief frowned and revealed an angry expression. He suddenly shouted, "You feel ashamed. Why are you venting your anger on her?" Many human race supremes looked at the mountain elder in disbelief. In their memories, the mountain elder had a bitter expression most of the time. He rarely smiled, much less got angry. This was the first time they had seen the mountain leader angry. Vermilion bird? Su Zimo was a little confused when he heard this name. As if seeing Su Zimo's confusion, the monkey said in a low voice, "I heard from my master that the ancestral flame sacred lord was the first vermilion bird sacred spirit in the world. So his name is Vermilion Bird. Only he has the right to be called Vermilion Bird. The Yin Yang Sacred Lord was the first Black Tortoise Sacred Spirit in the world. The Nirvana Sacred Lord was the White Tiger Sacred Spirit. The Heavenly Punishment Sacred Lord was the Azure Dragon Sacred Spirit." Su Zimo nodded inwardly. In that case, the Sacred Lords of the 4 sacred lands corresponded to the 4 legendary sacred spirits. The monkey continued, "Actually, there is a 5th sacred spirit. He is the Time and Space Sacred Lord. His true form is a black Qilin." 5 sacred spirits. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Another question came to mind. If the ancestral flame sacred lord was the vermilion bird sacred spirit, how could Saint Guyao be from the Yin tribe? The monkey said, "My master once told me that this old man from Xianmi Mountain has an extraordinary background. I didn't expect him to call the ancestral flame sacred lord by his name. I don't need you to teach me how to deal with her." The ancestral flame sacred lord glared at the mountain elder and huffed. "Guyao, come back with me." Before he'd even finished speaking, the ancestral flame sacred lord extended a large hand. An enormous force descended and instantly bound Saint Guyao. Although Saint Guyao was strong in battle, she was completely powerless in front of a great saint. Seeing that Saint Guyao was about to be taken away by the ancestral flame sacred lord, the mountain elder couldn't help but step forward. But soon, the light in his eyes dimmed, his clenched fists gradually relaxed, and he returned to his old and bitter self and lowered his head. Even so, the conversation just now had shocked the experts of the myriad races. After all, some of the sovereigns had been killed by the ancestral flame sacred lord, just because they'd talked in secret. The mountain elder had scolded the ancestral flame sacred lord, but he'd still lived. "Uncle Gu." Saint Guyao's last words were intermittent. "If mother was still here, she wouldn't want to see you so depressed." The mountain elder remained silent, allowing the messy white hair in front of his forehead to brush against his forehead. The ancestral flame sacred lord appeared for a short while, and then disappeared with Saint Guyao. The forbidden land of time and space was once again under the control of the saints of the 9 heavens. Araki Takashi, let's see who can save you today. The hidden heaven saint sneered. He raised his hand slightly, and a large dark hand appeared in the air. Saint power surged and enveloped Saint Guyao. Boom! Saints Jiang Chao and Hui Ming, who were originally standing beside him, dashed out and combined their Tao and saint power, destroying the hidden heaven saint's attack. Araki Takashi, leave now. Saints Jiang Chao and Hui Ming yelled. They had been hesitant, fearful, and hesitant. But at this moment, the 2 human saints still chose to stand up and fight against the saints of the 9 heavens. You don't know what's good for you, the firmament saint said in a deep voice. You want to stop us with just the 2 of you. The saints of the 9 heavens attacked at the same time, and engaged in a fierce battle with the saints Jiang Chao and Hui Ming. The battle between the saints started again, and this time, the saints of the 9 heavens had the absolute upper hand. Su Zimo, Daiyu, and the others didn't manage to escape far. Saints Jiang Chao and Hui Ming were already severely injured by the saints of the 9 heavens. They fell heavily to the ground, their combat power greatly reduced. Die! The saints of the 9 heavens ignored the severely injured saints Jiang Chao and Hui Ming. Instead, they chased after Su Zimo and attacked again. Boom! A loud explosion shook heaven and earth. This was the combined attack of the saints of the 9 heavens. Even a saint wouldn't be able to withstand it, let alone an honorable. Then everything disappeared. Su Zimo and the others were unharmed. A thin woman in white stood in front of them. She was like a dream, and she withstood the full-powered attack of the saints of the 9 heavens. Seeing this woman, the saints of the 9 heavens' expression changed. He exclaimed, "Evil Lord!" End of chapter. Chapter 3342. When he saw the evil lord again, she had already regained her strength and had grown up a lot. She was no longer that weak little girl. Back then, when the devil lord was in his twilight years, the evil lord was thin and weak, and the ghost's mother was old and frail. But because they had been severely wounded, they had been trapped in a dimensional realm and had never recovered. Facing the evil lord, the 9 heaven sages were slightly panicked. However, he quickly calmed down and his expression returned to normal. They were naturally no match for the evil lord. But in the space-time sacred land, there would be someone who would go up against the demon lord. This fortuitous encounter in the forbidden zone of time and space was originally an overt scheme. If they could lure the supremes of the 4 races into the forbidden land of time, the 5 sacred grounds would join forces and annihilate them. If the supremes of the 4 races did not come, the supremes of the 10,000 races would continue to occupy the Great Path Saint thrones, suppressing the strength of the 4 races. Of course, the 5 sacred lands' main target was still the masters of the 4 Daos. If they could lure the 4 Dao masters out of the 33 heavens, they would have a chance to kill them. Unfortunately, the development of the situation was somewhat beyond the 5 holy lands' expectations. Because of Su Zimo's sudden appearance, the various supremes of the holy clans appeared one after another. The 9 heaven saints were also forced to descend. Originally, the 9 heaven sages thought that it was impossible for the masters of the 4 paths to appear. But who would have thought that the evil lord would suddenly appear? The moment the evil lord appeared, another figure appeared in the forbidden land of time. This person wore a long black robe, had a head full of black hair, and stood with his hands behind his back. Just looking at him from afar would produce a sense of pressure that was as deep as the abyss and as lofty as the mountain. The 2 of them looked at each other from a distance. They hadn't even fought yet, but the space-time forbidden land was already starting to tremble. To be able to stand against the evil lord and not be at a disadvantage, the cultivation level of this person was self-evident. The great sage, the beings of the myriad races were secretly shocked. Although the arrival of the ancestral flame sacred master had brought great pressure to everyone, he didn't really make a move. Instead, he left quickly. Now that these 2 great sages had appeared in the forbidden land of time, it was obvious that they were going to fight. A battle between great sages. Greetings, Spacetime Holy Lord. When the Nine Heavens sage saw the black-robed man, he hurriedly bowed. The lord of the space-time sacred land. The Ink Qilin, one of the legendary 5 great sacred spirits. The space and time saint faintly smiled. I did not think that the demon lord would be willing to descend in his true form for the sake of a supreme's disciple. After all, in their eyes, even saints were a price they could abandon at any time. Hearing this, Sovereign Siemia curled his lips and stole a glance at Su Zimo. He thought to himself, it's hard to say if it's because of me. However, the space-time sacred lord stopped smiling and changed the topic. Since you're here, don't leave. His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when the two figures suddenly collided. It was as if they traversed space and time, and a deafening bang erupted. A battle between great sages had broken out. The power of a great sage could destroy Daos. The clash between the two great sages caused cracks to appear in the space-time forbidden zone, as if it could be destroyed at any moment. Fortunately, the Stone of Life emitted waves of light, quickly repairing this space. Every time the space-time Holy Lord attacked, the sky would collapse and the earth would cave in. The space-time Holy Lord's true form was the Ink Qilin. The Black Qilin cultivated one of the most fundamental great Daos, the Great Tao of Earth. The Great Daos that the 5 great holy masters cultivated corresponded to the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth Daos. For example, the Great Tao of Yellow Sand, the Great Tao of Earth, the Great Tao of Gravity, the Great Tao of Landslide, the Great Tao of Earth. The origin of many great Daos was the Great Tao of Earth. When the space-time sacred lord attacked with his full strength, the Great Tao of Earth filled this space-time forbidden zone. At this moment, all the great Daos that were related to the Great Tao of Earth were firmly suppressed and fell into chaos, unable to be controlled by themselves. Even Great Sky Sage could not avoid it. This was the Saint Domain unique to great sages. In the Saint Domain, all great Daos would become disordered, and it would not affect or harm the Saint Domain's master at all. The only place that could resist a Saint Domain was another Saint Domain. Many experts who were affected by the Demon Lord's Saint Domain were confused and lost. They were immersed in a dream, unable to extricate themselves. The closer they were to the battlefield, the greater the impact. The entire space-time forbidden zone had become the battlefield of 2 Saint Domains. It was very difficult for the 9 Heaven sages to attack Su Zimo and the others. And Su Zimo and the others were unable to move an inch under the resistance of the Saint Domain. It was impossible for them to leave. No one would have thought that this space-time forbidden zone would eventually become the battlefield of a great sage. So lively. At this moment, another voice suddenly appeared in the space-time forbidden zone. Even the sound of the battle between the space-time sacred lord and the demon lord could not drown out this person's voice. The next moment, another Saint Domain forced its way into the space-time forbidden zone and suppressed the demon lord. The second great sage had descended. This great sage was tall, and his back was abnormally broad. When the Saint Domain descended, all great Daos related to the origin of water were suppressed. The first black tortoise sacred spirit born in the world. He was also the master of the Yin-Yang sacred ground. With the 2 sacred lords joining forces, the demon lord was instantly at a disadvantage. The dream realm Saint Domain shook and was on the verge of collapse. He was forced to retreat, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Demon Lord, you must die today. The space-time sacred lord roared. Rumble. With a loud explosion, the 3 Saint Domains erupted in an earth-shattering collision, almost tearing the space-time forbidden zone apart. Heaven and earth seemed to have fallen silent. The next moment, a figure fell heavily to the ground, creating a huge crater. The demon lord was ultimately no match for the 2 sacred lords joining forces. In a sense, the origins of these 2 sacred lords were much greater than the demon lords. The 2 sacred lords were living beings born at the beginning of the 3 realms' evolution. Their starting point was the sacred spirit. As for the demon lord, he relied on his cultivation to survive that great upheaval. He was suppressed in a middle world for several epochs, cultivating step by step until he became a great sage. The demon lord, the Brahma ghost mother, and the lord of hell still had not appeared. Su Zimo was not surprised by this. Whether it was the battle of the 33 heavens, or the words of the space-time sacred lord, they all revealed an important piece of information. The four Tao masters were relatively safe only in the 33 heavens. Once they left, it was very likely that they would encounter danger. The demon lord, the Brahma ghost mother, and the lord of hell naturally would not take the risk. The demon lord was extremely egotistical. He did not distinguish between right and wrong. He would only choose the path that was beneficial to him. The Brahma ghost mother and the lord of hell had a grudge with Su Zimo, so they would not appear to save him. The demon lord had appeared, but not only did he fail to save Su Zimo and the others, but he had also fallen into a helpless situation. The demon lord slowly stood up from the crater. Despite being heavily injured, he was still expressionless, as if he could not feel any pain. The two sacred lords did not intend to give the demon lord any chance. They joined forces again, and the two saint domains descended, suppressing the demon lord. The demon lord looked to the side and stared at the white-haired old man in the distance. He suddenly said, Are you still not going to attack? Don't forget who you are. This is the human race's life-sacred land, and you were once the master of this sacred land. These were the first words the demon lord said after arriving in the space-time forbidden zone. And these words were earth-shattering. End of chapter. Chapter 3343. The Master of the Sacred Land. The Sacred Lord of Life. The hearts of all living beings were greatly shaken. Many experts in the Great Thousand World knew that the life-sacred land had been destroyed, just like the chaos-sacred land and the reincarnation-sacred land. But they didn't expect the Sacred Lord of Life to still be alive. Moreover, it was this white-haired, bitter-looking old man from Xianmi Mountain. Apart from the woodcutter and the fisherman, all the human supremes, including Su Zimo and Daiyu, were shocked. All signs showed that the mountain elder had a powerful background. Otherwise, the evil lord wouldn't have sent Daiyu to the mountain elder. But Su Zimo didn't expect the mountain elder to be the sacred lord of life, a supreme saint expert. What happened back then? Why did the sacred lord of life survive when the life-sacred land was destroyed? What was the mountain elder's current situation? His cultivation seemed to be only at the perfected Tao controlling realm. Did his cultivation level drop? Or was he hiding his cultivation level? The sacred lord of life from back then is long dead. The space-time sacred lord smiled faintly and said, The mountain elder before you is just a walking corpse guarding Xianmi Mountain. He has long lost the sharpness of a sacred lord. The yin-yang sacred lord looked at the evil lord with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Do you really think that by revealing his identity, he can help you? Although he survived back then, his cultivation level dropped to the supremes as a punishment. He hasn't moved for many years. What can he do? The mountain elder still lowered his head and didn't say a word. The evil lord didn't answer. He stared at the mountain elder and said coldly, Back then, Saint Xianpin sacrificed herself to give you a chance to live. She didn't want you to be so depressed. Saint Xianpin. When Su Zimo heard this title, he seemed to think of something. Shan Zhang's originally calm eyes also finally had a trace of ripple in them. The evil lord continued, Her bones are buried under Xianmi Mountain. What's the point of accompanying her for so many years? Now that the time has come, if you still don't do anything, Saint Xianpin will have died in vain. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo knew of such a background of Xianmi Mountain. If he was not mistaken, Saint Xianpin was most likely the ancestral flame sacred lord's cultivation partner, Saint Guyao's mother. At the same time, he suddenly had an answer to another question in his heart. Why was the ancestral flame sacred master a vermilion bird sacred spirit, while Saint Guyao was from the flame clan? The most likely possibility was the union of the ancestral flame sacred master and Saint Xianpin, or the union of the vermilion bird and the human race, giving birth to the first flame tribe member in the world, Guyao. Xianko. Hearing Saint Xuanpin's name, the yin-yang saint master suddenly snorted. He glanced at the mountain elder and said, Both of you were born at the same time and grew up together. She even exchanged her life for yours. Who knows if there's anything going on between the two of you? I've already told Vermilion Bird that this woman is not worthy of his pity. Hearing this, the mountain elder suddenly raised his head. His originally turbid eyes were now filled with anger. he slowly said. You shouldn't have tainted her innocence. To the mountain leader, no matter what others said, no matter how they mocked him, humiliated him, or provoked him, he didn't care. However, he would never allow anyone to insult Saint Xianpin. No one could do it. Between the two of them, there was nothing between them. The two of them had grown up together, cultivated together, and experienced countless years together. However, in the end, they were not fated to be together. Sometimes, even the long years of companionship could not overcome the arrangement of the heavens in the dark. Even so, Saint Xianpin was still the person he loved the most. He even loved the two children that Saint Xianpin had with the ancestral flame sacred master, Yaoji and Yinji. He treated the two children as his own, and loved them 100 times more. You care so much about her? The Yin-Yang Saint Master laughed softly and said, You want to challenge me? Back then, Saint Xianpin's death had saved Life Sacred Master's life. As a price, Saint Xianpin was severely injured by the combined forces of the 5 sacred masters. This caused her cultivation level to drop, and she became a mountain leader guarding Xianpin Mountain. All these years, the mountain leader had never had any conflicts with the 5 sacred masters. Even when a human saint was killed by the Tian Fa sacred ground, the mountain leader did not appear. Even if the Yin-Yang Saint Master had wanted to kill him, it had gradually faded. After all, in their eyes, Saint Xianpin was already dead. This senseless and muddle-headed old man was no threat to them. But now, the Yin-Yang Saint Master wanted to kill him again. If the mountain leader really wanted to fight him, he did not mind killing him. If a prime dared to be disrespectful to a sacred master, he would definitely die. The mountain leader did not answer. He suddenly took a step forward. Boom! In the forbidden land of time and space, the heavens and earth trembled, and the great Tao resonated. Endless power surged into the mountain leader's body. His saint power surged violently. The mountain leader's aura was soaring rapidly. He had entered the saint realm, with just one step. The paragons of all races were shocked. Ever since the battle in the forbidden land of time and space broke out, the great Tao here had become chaotic and disorderly. The flames of war had spread to every corner of the forbidden land of time and space. There was almost no pure land in this world. Under such circumstances, there was no way to unify the Tao. The great Tao was extremely unstable and violent. Trying to unify the Tao under such circumstances was no different from suicide. Thus, no paragon dared to try unifying the Tao and breaking through to the saint realm. After the battle between the great sages broke out, the forbidden land of time and space was filled with cracks and was on the verge of collapse. It was even more impossible to unify the Tao and become a saint. No one had expected that the mountain leader would try to break through to the saint realm under such circumstances. Moreover, he had become a saint in one step. Compared to the shock of the paragons of all races, the space-time sacred lord and the Yin-Yang sacred lord were much calmer. They only frowned. Even if the mountain leader had entered the saint realm, he would not be a threat to them. The Yin-Yang sacred lord even clapped his hands and laughed. He said leisurely, You have become a saint again. You have some skills. The space-time sacred lord also smiled faintly. After all, he is the first human in this world. In terms of luck, no one can compare to him. The mountain leader remained silent. After standing still for a while, he took another step forward. Boom! Before the great Tao's voice dissipated, it was replaced by another loud voice. It was not just the forbidden land of time and space. Even the entire greater world was filled with strange phenomena. Everyone was shocked. The space-time sacred lord and the Yin-Yang sacred lord's expressions finally changed. A power that could compete with them surged from the mountain leader's body. His aura was terrifying. This was a great sage. The mountain leader had only taken 2 steps, and his cultivation had recovered. He had become a great sage again. Of course, it was because he had reached such heights before. However, going from a paragon to a great sage in 2 steps was enough to shock the entire greater world. The mountain leader's hair was still white, and he still looked old. However, his eyes were like torches, and his aura was completely different. 33 heavens. In a ball of black fog, countless ferocious and terrifying ghost faces suddenly appeared. Then, a woman's voice came from within. The life-sacred Lord has returned. Another man, who was emitting a sinister aura, raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled. It seems that we have another helper. It's hard to say. With his back facing the two, a man in armor sitting on a tombstone said lightly, "He has only become the life-sacred Lord. It doesn't affect the overall situation. The treasure that Master made is with that person, right?" The woman suddenly asked. "Yes." The man on the tombstone replied. "It depends on what he chooses." End of chapter. Chapter 3344. Forbidden Spacetime Zone. The Mountain Elder had become a supreme sage. Without saying a word, he crossed the void and appeared before the Yin-Yang Sacred Master. He raised his Saint Domain and suppressed the Yin-Yang Sacred Master. The Yin-Yang Sacred Master's words had truly angered him. Boom! The Saint Domains of both sides clashed with a loud explosion. On the other side, the evil Lord faced the Space-Time Sacred Master once again. The battle between the Supreme Sages had begun again. The four Saint Domains clashed in the Forbidden Spacetime Zone. They devoured each other, causing the Great Tao in this area to become chaotic and chaotic. A Great Tao storm was formed. The Mountain Elder had just become a Supreme Sage. Although he looked old, his battle strength was shocking. The two sides had just clashed, but the Mountain Elder's Saint Domain was already suppressing the Yin-Yang Sacred Master. Although this place was called the Forbidden Spacetime Zone, it was still the life-sacred land. And the Mountain Elder was the owner of this place. The Stone of Life emitted a 5-colored divine light that entered the Mountain Elder's Saint Domain, giving it an endless supply of energy. The Yin-Yang Sacred Master's Saint Domain started to shrink under the Mountain Elder's attacks. On the other side, the evil Lord had just been injured by the Space-Time Sacred Master and the Yin-Yang Sacred Master. Now that he was facing the Space-Time Sacred Master alone, he didn't have any advantage. Of course, after cultivating to the Supreme Sage level, the difference in battle strength wasn't that big. Even if one side had the upper hand, it was impossible to completely suppress the other side in a short period of time. Boom! 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 The battle between the Supreme Sages continued. The four Saint Domains had been pushed to their limits. Each of them released their own light that filled the entire area. Apart from the people in the Forbidden Spacetime Zone, the living beings in the Great Thousand World couldn't see what was happening inside through the spatial node. In the Forbidden Spacetime Zone, the Great Tao storm swept in all directions. The spatial node had already been destroyed. Su Zimo, Dai Yu Monkey, and the others were forced to stay here and watch this earth-shattering battle. Dai Yu frowned and murmured. Luckily, the remaining 3 sacred masters didn't appear. Otherwise, the evil Lord and the Mountain Elder wouldn't be able to hold on. Su Zimo pondered deeply. Could the 3 lords of the sacred grounds be wary because they're worried that the Fiend Lord, Ghost Mother, and the Lord of Hell would do something? That might not be the case. The monkey seemed to have thought of something and said, "There is another possibility, which is that the Space-Time Sacred Master and the Yin-Yang Sacred Master have absolute confidence in suppressing the evil Lord and the Mountain Elder. Thus, the remaining 3 sacred masters naturally do not need to act." Su Zimo frowned slightly. The monkey's words made him feel a little worried. After Mountain Elder became a supreme sage, the Space-Time Holy Lord and the Yin-Yang Holy Lord were a little surprised. However, they didn't seem to take it to heart, and still acted as if victory was in their hands. Humph. At this moment, the Time and Space Holy Lord showed a trace of impatience and said coldly, "Evil Lord, you were only a saint back then and didn't have the chance to try this sacred artifact. Today I'll give you a chance." Before he finished speaking, the Space-Time Sacred Lord pointed forward. Rumble. The void above the evil Lord's head suddenly split open, as a mysterious yellow 9-floored pagoda descended from the skies, emitting an endless amount of pressure as it came crashing down heavily. When this pagoda appeared, the heavens and earth let out a sorrowful wail. Not to mention the Supreme's present, even the 9 heavens saints revealed a trace of fear in their eyes when they saw the pagoda. This mysterious yellow 9-story pagoda seemed to contain a supreme might of heaven and earth. In fact, this level of majesty had already surpassed that of a great sage. The evil lord's face was grim, as his figure suddenly disappeared. The starlight in the sky flowed into a river. On the river, a huge spiritual boat floated quietly, carrying countless dream realms. Rumble! The pagoda descended and the countless dream realms shattered. After a short confrontation, the spiritual boat suddenly exploded and collapsed. The evil lord's figure reappeared, but he was covered in blood, and his face was even paler. Hee. The space-time sacred lord chuckled and said, "How does this mysterious yellow pagoda taste?" The evil lord didn't reply. His figure was already on the verge of collapse. From the looks of it, it was unknown whether he could survive the next attack. On the other side, the Yin-Yang Holy Lord suddenly threw out a picture scroll. This picture scroll started with the 9 palaces, and continued to evolve. It revealed the 8 trigrams, the 7 stars, the 6 lights, the 5 elements, the 4 divisions and the 3 talents. Finally, it stopped at the yin and yang. This picture scroll seemed to contain all the mysteries of heaven and earth, and had evolved into the universe. Rumble! The Mountain Elder's holy region was also crushed by this picture scroll. Even with the Stone of Life, it couldn't hold on any longer. Old thing! The Yin-Yang Holy Lord sneered and said, "This Taiji diagram isn't comfortable, right?" The space-time sacred lord and the Yin-Yang Holy Lord each took out a sacred artifact and instantly turned the situation around, severely injuring the Mountain Elder and the evil lord. The sacred artifacts of the Mountain Elder and the evil lord were completely destroyed by the mysterious yellow pagoda and the Taiji diagram. They lost their light. These 2 sacred artifacts. Su Zimo felt his heart palpitate. Even the sacred lord's descent didn't give him such a feeling of fear. Monkey suddenly said, "I heard from Master that the reason why the 5 sacred lords are so powerful and undefeatable is because they each have a Heavenly Tao sacred artifact." Heavenly Tao sacred artifact? Su Zimo frowned. Monkey nodded and said, "It is said that the Heavenly Tao sacred artifact contains the power to kill a great sage." Su Zimo and the others were shocked. In a battle between sages, only victory and defeat could be determined. It was difficult to determine life and death. The power of a sage was not enough to destroy a Tao. As long as a Tao was not destroyed, a sage would not die. Only a great sage had the power to destroy a Tao. It was the same between great sages. In a battle between great sages, it was difficult to completely kill each other. However, if what Monkey said was true, then the sacred lords of time and space and yin and yang, who had the Heavenly Tao sacred artifacts, had the power to kill a great sage. Su Zimo said, "If that's the case, the power of the Heavenly Tao sacred artifact should have already surpassed that of a great sage. How did the 5 sacred lords get their hands on such a weapon?" "I don't know." Monkey shook his head and said, "Master is very secretive about this and doesn't want to talk about it." Monkey paused for a while and said, "Master is unwilling to fight with the 5 sacred lords. He must be afraid of them." "No wonder." Su Zimo said, "The Demon Lord, Ghost Mother, and Lord of Hell have not appeared. They must be afraid of the Heavenly Tao sacred artifacts in the hands of the 5 sacred lords." On second thought, Su Zimo was puzzled. He frowned and asked, "Since the 5 great sacred lords have the Heavenly Tao saint weapon, why did they return empty-handed when they fought against the 4 Tao masters back then?" "I don't know the exact situation," Monkey said. "I only heard from Master that the 5 sacred lords' Heavenly Tao sacred artifacts did not seem to be able to unleash their true power in the 33 heavens." "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. "This was also why the Demon Lord and the other 2 were unwilling to leave the 33 heavens easily. The 5 sacred lords were also aware of this. Therefore, they wanted to use this opportunity to lure the masters of the 4 Tao out. Unfortunately, the Demon Lord and the other 2 were unwilling to take the risk. Only the Demon Lord could descend with his true body. End of chapter. Chapter 3345. The arrival of the 2 Heavenly Tao Saint artifacts instantly changed the tide of the battle. For some reason, the 2 Heavenly Tao Saint artifacts made Su Zimo's heart palpitate. At the same time, they made him feel extremely disgusted. This feeling of disgust seemed to originate from Chaos Qinglian's inherited memories. However, after fusing with the creation, karmic fire, and karmic virtue lotus, his inherited memories were not complete. He could not see what had happened back then. However, Chaos Qinglian's destruction must have had something to do with these two heavenly Dao Saint artifacts. Another strange thing happened to him as well. Even when the space-time Sacred Lord and the Yin-Yang Sacred Lord arrived, the Zhuzhao and Yueying Sacred Stones did not react. However, after the two heavenly Dao Saint artifacts arrived, the Zhuzhao and Yueying Sacred Stones seemed to have sensed something. They suddenly hid their auras and did not reveal any energy waves. Even when Su Zimo tried to activate them with his divine will, the two sacred stones did not react at all. After ascending to the greater world, the two sacred stones clearly showed a different state from the lesser world and middle world. They even awakened their spiritual consciousness and could cultivate on their own. Because of this, Su Zimo deduced that the Zhuzhao and Yueying sacred stones should have come from the greater world. Now, under the suppression of the two heavenly Dao Saint artifacts, the two sacred stones went into hibernation. Su Zimo looked at the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord in midair with a worried expression. The Mountain Elder's sacred domain had been shattered after taking on the Taiji diagram. He was already injured. The Evil Lord was injured by the two sacred lords and was suppressed by the Heaven-Earth-Black-Yellow Pagoda. He was in an even worse state. It was unknown if he could survive the next attack. He did not expect that the so-called opportunity in the Forbidden Land of Time would drag the two great sages into it. They might even be killed. Su Zimo and the others were just small fries. The sacred lords did not even take them seriously. The great sages were the real targets of the 5 sacred grounds. The Yin-Yang sacred lord looked down at the Mountain Elder with the Taiji diagram above his head. He said coldly, "Gu Shen, you should have died more than 6 billion years ago. You should be satisfied that you have lived to this day." The space-time sacred lord held the Heaven-Earth-Black-Yellow Pagoda. He was not in a hurry to attack. He wanted to see if the Demon Lord and the others would show up. Unfortunately, from beginning to end, the Demon Master and the other two did not show up. The space-time Holy Lord looked at the Evil Lord with eyes full of pity. He said indifferently, "Those 3 are really heartless. They watched you die without doing anything." The Evil Lord did not reply. He merely looked at the Mountain Elder on the other side and said expressionlessly, "In this life, it's time for you to make a choice. You are the first human to be born in this world. You cultivate the great Tao of man. You are not only the sacred Lord of life, but also the Lord of human Tao." Everyone was in an uproar. Su Zimo and Dai Yu were shocked when they heard this. The two looked at each other and thought of the same thing at the same time. Back then, when Dai Yu was severely injured, the human path that leaped into the 6 abysses of the netherworld appeared in Tianhuang mainland. There were also all sorts of strange things about Tianhuang mainland. Not to mention, there were many races on planet Tianhuang. The many treasures that appeared in Tianhuang mainland alone were enough to shock anyone. Even treasures that originated from the greater 1,000 worlds, such as illumination and nether glow, were gathered in Tianhuang mainland. If Tianhuang mainland was formed from the shards of the human Tao that the sacred Lord of Life cultivated, everything would make sense. That was because the birth of Tianhuang mainland originated from the greater 1,000 worlds. Back then, the sacred Lord of Life was severely injured, and her human Tao was shattered. A shard fell into a minor world and formed Tianhuang mainland later on. Dai Yu said, "Back then, I mentioned to you that many humans in Tianhuang mainland do not have spirit roots. That's strange. Now that I think about it, it's not hard to understand if Tianhuang mainland was formed from a shard of the human Tao." At that moment, some of the doubts in Su Zimo's heart were answered. It was no wonder why there were only 4 Taos in the middle world, and no heavenly Tao or human Tao. That was because the Lord of human Tao was not in the middle world at all. Su Zimo lamented when he looked at the white-haired old man. To think that this old man who guarded Xianmi Mountain day and night with a bitter expression was not only the sacred Lord of Life, he was also the Lord of human Tao. However, the Lord of human Tao did not seem to have a close relationship with the 4 Taos. So what if you're the Lord of Human Tao? Sacred Lord Yin Yang scoffed coldly. Your lifespan is up. What sacred lord? Even the title of the human master can't save you. At this moment, the mountain elder's hand reached into his wide sleeves and slowly took out a tattered book from within. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat when he saw the tattered book. He had lived in Xianmi Mountain for a few years, and each time he met the mountain elder, the latter would always have a tattered book beside him. At times he would flip it open and read it. At other times he would cover his face and take a nap. At other times he would toss it aside casually. Although the book looked tattered, Su Zimo was not bothered by it. At that moment, the mountain elder took out that tattered book. Shifting his gaze, Sacred Lord Yin Yang looked at the tattered book and suddenly chuckled. Oh, I was wondering what else you were relying on. So it's this human book. Not bad, the mountain elder nodded. Looking at the tattered book in his hand, a complicated look appeared in his eyes. Sacred Lord Yin Yang shook his head and sighed. The human book is also a heavenly Tao Saint artifact. It's a pity that it's useless now. Why don't you give it a try? The mountain elder said calmly. Then I'll fulfill your wish. Sacred Lord Yin Yang did not waste any time. He took out the Tai Chi diagram again and pressed it down on the mountain elder. Sacred Lord Yin Yang also threw out the heaven-earth-black-yellow pagoda toward the evil lord. The descent of the two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts shook the earth and mountains. The mountain elder suddenly threw the human book in his hand into the air and released his divine sense. Rumble. At the same time, the stone of life in the forbidden land of time seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly rose from the ground and fused with the human book. The human book shone brightly. The tattered pages of the book started to heal rapidly after fusing with the stone of life. The power of the human book continued to rise. The human book in the air flipped through its pages rapidly. Each page emitted a dazzling light and an endless amount of power. Ripples appeared in the air as it tried to resist the power of the two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts. Boom, boom, boom. Following a series of loud bangs, the light emitted by the human book flickered, and its aura was completely suppressed. Humph! Sacred Lord Yin Yang snorted. Even a complete human book cannot resist the power of two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts. Do you think your tattered book can resist the power of two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts? The mountain elder knew this very well. However, he had no other choice. The evil lord was in a very bad condition. He could not resist the next attack of the heaven-earth-black-yellow pagoda. He could only use the human book to resist the power of the two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts. Su Zimo looked at the human book in the air and frowned slightly. After fusing with the stone of life, the tattered pages of the human book had healed. However, it seemed like it was still a distance away from becoming a real heavenly Tao Saint artifact. Night Spirit suddenly said. A page was torn out from the middle of the human book. Su Zimo was stunned when he heard this. Suddenly, a thought flashed across his mind. End of chapter. Chapter 3346. Book of Life and Death? Su Zimo did have a piece of black paper with the name Book of Life and Death on him. Back then, he took the black paper from the master of the underworld and kept it with him. However, he did not find anything useful after studying it for many years. Although he had seen the old book in the mountain elder's hands many times, he had never associated it with the Book of Life and Death. The old book was not eye-catching and looked very different from the Book of Life and Death in his hands. The material of the human book in the mountain elder's hands was slightly yellow and looked no different from ordinary paper. On the other hand, the Book of Life and Death was a piece of black paper that looked eerie. Su Zimo instinctively took out the Book of Life and Death. The black paper was originally quiet. However, when it appeared in the forbidden zone of time and space, it seemed to have sensed something and suddenly emitted a pitch-black light. In an instant, the entire world darkened. The experts in the forbidden zone of time and space were shrouded by the black light and could not help but feel a sense of fear. It was extremely oppressive. Even the sages of the 9 heavens were not spared. The expressions of the space-time sacred master and the yin-yang sacred master changed. They stared at the black paper in Su Zimo's hands and frowned, as if they wanted to see through the power of the black paper. All of a sudden, The two of them felt a cold and eerie aura, and could not help but groan and shiver. The two sacred masters were shocked, and quickly recalled the two heavenly Tao sacred artifacts that were attacking the mountain elder. Buzz! The two heavenly axiom saint artifacts seemed to have sensed something as well. They trembled slightly and shook the void. A powerful ripple spread out, dispersing the cold chi brought by the black paper. At this moment, the mountain elder turned his head and looked at the black paper in Su Zimo's hands. He had a complicated expression and sighed deeply. After a moment of silence, the mountain elder waved his hands. The black paper seemed to have been summoned by some kind of power, and turned into a ray of black light, and suddenly flew towards the human book in the mountain elder's hands. In the blink of an eye, the black paper entered the gap in the middle of the human book, and fit perfectly with the missing page. Even the edges of the tear fit together perfectly. From the looks of it, this piece of black paper was indeed torn from the human book. However, this piece of black paper still looked out of place with the slightly yellowed paper of the human book. But soon, the human book began to change. The black paper emitted a gloomy black light. Like ink, it gradually seeped into the pages of the human book, layer by layer. A moment later, the human book was dyed black. At this moment, the aura of the human book had finally reached a level where it could compete with the two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts. Another heavenly Tao Saint artifact. There was no joy on the mountain leader's face. When Su Zimo saw this, he also felt a faint sense of loss. The human book recovered and returned to its peak. However, his aura was completely different from before. Although the original human book was in tatters, it emitted a vast, warm, and all-encompassing power. At this moment, the human book was dead silent, gloomy, and murderous. Meanwhile, Nether Blood Sea, Holy Ground Land. The aura of the black-robed man who had been sitting beside the sea of blood suddenly changed, and he slowly stood up. Wu Dao's main body, who was deducing Dao techniques, seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes as well. Over the years, he had already comprehended all the great Daos left behind in the ruins of the saints. When he first comprehended the great Daos, it took a relatively long time. However, after comprehending the great Tao of metal and the great Tao of water, the great Daos derived from those great Daos would be twice the result with half the effort. At this moment, there were already thousands of great Daos in the Yuanwu world. They were densely packed and crisscrossed, evolving a unique order. Of course, Wu Dao's main body was still unable to reach Dao integration. As the number of great Daos in the Yuanwu world increased, the possibility of Dao integration to become a sage decreased. Wu Dao's main body was certain that his path to Dao integration to become a sage was completely cut off. All these years, he had been thinking about his own path, but he still had no clue. At that moment, sensing the abnormality from the black-robed man, Wu Dao's main body stopped deducing and looked at the black-robed man's back view thoughtfully. The black-robed man had clearly become even more terrifying and unfathomable than before. And this time just happened to be when the human book fused with the black paper and completed its transformation. Wu Dao's main body realized that the black-robed man might be about to leave. Wu Dao's main body pondered for a moment and suddenly asked, "You're waiting for this moment, right?" Over the years, Wu Dao's main body had tried to communicate with the black-robed man, but the latter did not respond. It was just that when Wu Dao's main body was deducing Dao techniques, the black-robed man would occasionally turn his head and stare in his direction with a strange expression. At that moment, when he heard Wu Dao's main body's question, the black-robed man turned around and walked over, sitting in front of Wu Dao's main body. "Your Dao technique can't be deduced anymore." The black-robed man did not directly respond to Wu Dao's main body's words. Instead, he said that with a faint smile. The long hair that was originally covering his forehead fluttered in the wind and gradually moved to the back of his head, revealing an exceptionally handsome face. He was younger than Wu Dao's main body had imagined. His eyes were as deep as the abyss, and inadvertently, there would be a hint of vicissitudes, loneliness, and desolation. The black-robed man exuded a sense of loneliness that could not be tolerated by the world. That sense of loneliness, coupled with that face, formed a unique aura. Wu Dao's main body had never seen it on anyone before. That aura was unforgettable after a single glance. Wu Dao's main body did not reply to the black-robed man and continued. If I'm not wrong, you're the master of the reincarnation sacred ground. Initially, your reincarnation Dao was flawed and imperfect, because the heavenly Dao and human Dao were not within your control. However, earlier on, you finally controlled human Dao with the help of the human book. That page of the life and death book was indeed a page of the human book. However, the black-robed man refined it into another sacred weapon. When this sacred weapon merged with the human book, it would assimilate the human book. The black-robed man would then use this opportunity to control the human book, and even the great Tao of man through the human book. That was also the reason why the mountain elder had always been somewhat resistant to this. Wu Dao's main body believed that the mountain elder should have sensed the existence of the life and death book when Qinglian's main body came to Xianmi Mountain with the life and death book. However, the mountain elder had never mentioned it. If the space-time divine lord and the yin-yang divine lord had not killed him, he might not have used the life and death book to repair the human book and restore it to the level of a heavenly Dao sacred weapon. The biggest winner from this would be the Samsara divine lord sitting in front of Wu Dao's main body. You're only half right. The black-robed man smiled faintly. I'm not the Samsara divine lord. After pausing for a while, the black-robed man smiled and said something shocking. You've seen the real Samsara divine lord and even fought with him. End of chapter. Chapter 3347. Wu Dao's original body was shocked. Not only had he seen the Samsara Saint Lord, but he had also fought with him? In the martial Dao true body's mind, many figures flashed through his mind. Finally, he focused on one person. Fengdu. Wu Dao's original body said slowly. Fengdu was the master of the netherworld. Within the netherworld, there was the 6 paths of reincarnation. Among the experts that Wu Dao's original body had encountered and fought with, he was probably the only one who could become the Samsara Saint Lord. However, Wu Dao's original body was even more confused. If Fengdu was the Samsara Saint Lord, it was not surprising that he could live forever. However, with his identity and achievements in the middle world, how could he be below the demon master and the evil emperor? Why couldn't he become a great emperor? If the demon master, the evil emperor, and the others had chosen to ascend to the greater world, why was Fengdu still in the netherworld? In other words, other than the life Saint Lord, the Samsara Saint Lord had not died? Fengdu had the life and death book that the black-robed man had created. They were obviously on the same side and had some kind of relationship. Wu Dao's original body had suppressed Fengdu before, but the black-robed man had not shown any hostility towards him. Why was that? If Fengdu was the Samsara Saint Lord, who was the black-robed man? What was the relationship between the demon master, the evil emperor, the lord of hell, and the black-robed man? The black-robed man nodded and said, Fengdu was indeed the Samsara Saint Lord. However, he is now only a part of the Samsara Saint Lord's soul. Back then, the Samsara Saint Lord's physical body was destroyed. Only this part of his soul was left. Wu Dao's original body was speechless. During the Great World's turmoil more than 6 billion years ago, although the mountain elder's cultivation level had dropped, he had at least kept his life, and had now recovered to his peak. Back then, the Samsara Saint Lord was only left with a part of his soul. He became Fengdu and guarded the netherworld. Fengdu's actions were all driven by you, right? Wu Dao's original body asked calmly. The 9 heavens as the court was the source of all the tragedies in the middle world. Over the countless years, Fengdu had also committed countless crimes in the medium-class world. Too many to be recorded. Ha! The black-robed man suddenly laughed, and his expression was a little mocking and disdainful. How many life forms have died because of Fengdu? There are some living beings who do things that are 1,000 times, 10,000 times more ruthless than Fengdu. Who can do anything to them? Who are they? Wu Dao's original body immediately asked. What happened to the great thousand world back then? Who are you? Heaven and earth are black and yellow, and the universe has its own rules and laws. No matter if it's the billions of minor kiliocosms, the 3,000 worlds, or even the greater kiliocosms, there will always be various tribulations. The black-robed man did not answer. Instead, he continued. The living beings of the myriad races cultivate and grow. Whether it is for survival, authority, or longevity, the intertwining of fate, countless karma will be formed. During this process, all sorts of battles will definitely occur between the living beings of the myriad races. They will become more and more intense, and at a certain point, they might finally erupt and bring about a calamity. There are big and small calamities, but they are all within a relatively controllable range. These can be called calamities. Wu Dao's original body could not help but recall the many calamities that had happened in Tianhuang mainland. The blood demon Dao Lord alone had launched several calamities in order to refine the living beings of Tianhuang mainland into the sanguine race. In the primordial era, there was the invasion of the Protoss. In this era, there were still primordial races that joined forces to suppress the myriad races. There were countless calamities of various sizes. However, as the black-robed man said, these calamities were controlled and resolved because of him, Monk Daming and the others. According to the black-robed man, these calamities could be called calamities. The black-robed man continued. However, above the calamities, there is a limitless calamity. Once this calamity erupts, it can't be controlled or reversed. The trichiliocosm will return to chaos, and all living beings will die. Very few people in the Great Thousand World can survive. Limitless calamity. Wu Dao's original body frowned and was puzzled. The information revealed by the black-robed man's words had already exceeded his current realm and understanding of the universe. Why is there a limitless calamity? Wu Dao's original body asked. The black-robed man said, when the living beings of the myriad races reproduce and cultivate, their realms will become higher and higher, and they will consume more and more resources. As the lifespan of cultivators increases, the energy accumulated in their bodies will also increase. The moment they achieve eternal life, they will reach the peak. The energy of the universe is not endless. It is only absorbed and not released. One day, the universe will dry up and walk towards destruction. Wu Dao's original body pondered. Back then, the Fiend Lord had said something similar to him. The lifespan of mortals was less than 100 years. After death, their souls returned to heaven and earth, their flesh and blood dissipated, and all energy returned to nature. There was absorption and release, so this balance would not be broken. As more and more cultivators appeared, the balance would gradually be broken. Wu Dao's original body frowned and said, are you saying that the source of the limitless calamity is the cultivators of the world? Not necessarily. The black-robed man shook his head and said, the heavens move vigorously and constantly improve themselves. The cultivation of all living beings is in accordance with the laws of heaven and earth. The true source of breaking the balance and causing the limitless calamity is the eternal beings. No matter how strong a cultivator is, the energy accumulated in their bodies is limited. Furthermore, one day, they will die, and this energy will return to heaven and earth. But the eternal beings are different. They have selfishness, emotions, and desires, and they live forever. The more eternal beings there are, the faster the limitless calamity will come. Wu Dao's original body was silent for a moment, then asked, what does that great upheaval of the greater thousand worlds have to do with the limitless calamity? The limitless calamity definitely did not happen. Otherwise, the 3,000 worlds would have been destroyed, and they would no longer exist. The black-robed man said, some saints are worried that the limitless calamity will come and endanger themselves. Therefore, they want to kill all living beings in the universe in advance, clearing the karma of heaven and earth to delay the limitless calamity. They have done this more than once in their long lives, so they are already familiar with it. The black-robed man said it calmly, but Wu Dao's original body was shocked. Everyone below the saints are ants. This was not a lie. Killing all living beings in the universe meant that all living beings except the saints would die. All life in the billions of small worlds, medium worlds, and even the greater thousand worlds would be wiped out. What kind of terrifying massacre would that be? Compared to this, Fengdu's actions were nothing. The black-robed man said. However, more than 6 billion years ago, Another group of saints could not bear to see all living beings die, so they stood up and tried their best to stop it. Thus a war between the saints broke out. This was the origin of that great upheaval. The result of this great upheaval was naturally the fall of many saints, and the destruction of the three holy lands. Because of the complete fall of many saints, the great path saint position was empty, and their energy returned to the universe. This also indirectly delayed the limitless calamity, preventing all living beings in the three realms from being wiped out. The black-robed man pointed at the ruins below and said, "The fallen saints of that war are all buried here." Wu Dao's original body said, "There are 3,000 corpses of saints here, and they are all from the human race." He had long noticed it during his years of cultivation. The black-robed man said, "The saints who stood up back then were the 3,000 saints of the human race." Wu Dao's original body was moved. End of chapter. Chapter 3348. The 3,000 saints of the human race had an endless lifespan and could have avoided death. If they had followed the other saints and killed all living beings in the universe, they could have successfully delayed the infinite calamity and continued to rule the three realms. However, these saints made another choice. This choice was so tragic. The surrounding sea of blood and the piles of saint skeletons under their feet were proof. In fact, it was the self-sacrifice of the 3,000 saints of the human race in exchange for the survival of all living beings in the world. Otherwise, more than 6 billion years ago, the living beings of the trichiliocosm would have been killed by the saints of the heavens and cleared of karma. It was probably because of this that the human race was suppressed by the 5 holy lands after that great turmoil until today. Wu Dao's true body suddenly asked, "As far as I know, there weren't many humans back then. How could they give birth to 3,000 saints?" The number of saints in the trichiliocosm was probably only about 10,000. There were thousands of races, and there were 3,000 saints in the human race alone. How terrifying was that? When he was in the middle world, Su Zimo had vaguely sensed that the existence of the human race was extremely special. They were born weak and far inferior to other races, but their potential was endless. In the middle world, most of the races that had proven their Tao as great emperors were also humans. The black-robed man was silent for a long time, and a strange expression appeared on his face. It seemed to be nostalgic, and with a hint of pride. He said slowly, "Because the human race is a race that she created with all her effort." She created? A hint of surprise flashed across Wu Dao's true body's eyes. Surprised? The black-robed man said indifferently, "It's not just the human race. The birth of all living beings was never accidental. They were created. The reason why Chaos Qinglian is called the god of plants is because all the plants in the trichiliocosm were created by Chaos Qinglian." Wu Dao's true body was shocked. He had thought that the living beings of all races were born from heaven and earth. He did not expect that the origin of the living beings of all races was created. In this way, it was understandable why the bloodline of the chaotic green lotus was able to suppress all living beings. The black-robed man said, "Before the 3,000 worlds were formed, and even before the chaos world, this universe only had a vague prototype. There was no great Tao, nor any life or matter. As time passed, this world gave birth to 6 Taisha primordial spirits. Chaos Qinglian was one of them. Chaos Qinglian actually had such a great background." Wu Dao's main body was secretly shocked. These 6 Taisha primordial spirits occupied the 6 great heavenly Daos. They opened up the heavens and earth, evolved living beings and created all things. The 3,000 great Tao gradually formed, and the first to attain Tao were the 9 Chaos Holy Spirits. The heart of Wu Dao's main body stirred. 9 Chaos Holy Spirits? He had heard the monkey mention before that there were 5 great saint spirits. Could it be that he was one of them? Who were the other 4? The black-robed man said, "Of the 9 Chaos Holy Spirits, 5 of them are the current masters of the 5 great sacred grounds." As expected, Wu Dao nodded. The black-robed man said, "As for the other 4 besides the monkey, the Holy Spirit of Yin, the Holy Spirit of Yang, and the Good Fortune Holy Spirit all fell in that great turmoil." The Good Fortune Holy Spirit mentioned by the black-robed man should be the good fortune Qinglian, who was also the Chaos Holy Lord. As for the Holy Spirit of Yin and the Holy Spirit of Yang, a thought suddenly flashed through the mind of Wu Dao's main body. Could it be? The black-robed man continued. The 6 Taisha primordial spirits continued to evolve living beings. One of them created many races that lived in places with water sources like rivers, lakes, and seas. Another one created a race that was born with scales. The third one created a race that was a type of mutated beast. For example, the 9 infants and the ghost chariot originated from this one. The fourth one created a race that soared through the heavens and earth. They were the mother of all birds. The fifth one created a race that was a land beast. The sixth one created a race of plants. Hearing this, Wu Dao's main body took a deep breath. The black-robed man's words allowed him to gain a new understanding of this vast universe. Bloodline reversion, bloodline reversion. Wu Dao's main body whispered to himself. Then he suddenly said, so the true meaning of reversion lies here. In the boundless universe, only those with an atavistic bloodline had the qualifications to be called saints. And once one's bloodline underwent atavistic reversion, they would become abnormally powerful. But Su Zimo still didn't understand just what deep meaning there was in bloodline reversion. It was only now that he realized that this so-called atavistic reversion referred to the awakening of the bloodline of a Taisha primordial spirit within one's body, and it was because of this that one would be reborn, and their combat strength would rise. And the reason that Qinglian's true body that had fused with 3 lotus flowers was able to suppress and even gain the upper hand against a saint whose bloodline had undergone atavistic reversion was because she was the chaos Qinglian herself. She didn't need to undergo atavistic reversion. Her existence itself was an ancestor. The black-robed man's information solved many of the doubts in Su Zimo's heart. In the forbidden land of space-time, whether it was the space-time Saint Lord or the Yin-Yang Saint Lord, the great Daos they controlled were the great Daos of earth and water, not space-time and Yin-Yang. Su Zimo was still a little puzzled about this. It was only now that he realized that the establishment of the 6 great holy lands was the legendary 6 Taisha primordial spirits. They were the true masters of the 6 great holy lands. And space-time, Yin-Yang, heavenly punishment, nirvana, ancestral fire, and chaos were the 6 great heavenly Daos that the black-robed man spoke of. Wu Dao's main body asked, these 6 Taisha primordial spirits controlled the heavenly Daos, opened up the heavens and earth, and created life. Even the 6 Saint Lords were created by them. What realm are they at? The black-robed man smiled. Realm doesn't mean much to them. Although the infinite tribulation is terrifying, it is nothing but a tribulation to them. Even if all saints die, they can't do anything to them. Above the great Tao, the kings of saints. If you must give them a name, you can call them the Heavenly Tao Saint Kings. Heavenly Tao Saint Kings. The black-robed man said. After countless years, an expert of the 3,000 worlds cultivated against the heavens, broke through many obstacles, and finally controlled the heavenly Tao of life, and became the Heavenly Tao Saint King, comparable to the 6 Taisha primordial spirits. Wu Dao's main body nodded. This was the origin of the life holy land. No wonder there was no such thing as bloodline atavism in the human race. This was because the Heavenly Tao Saint King, who created the human race, was a postnatal cultivator, not one of the 6 Taisha primordial spirits that were first born in the 3,000 worlds. The black-robed man said. The first human that this Saint King created was the goddess of grain, who later became the life holy lord. She was afraid that the goddess of grain would be lonely, so she created a second human called Xian Ke. At this point the black-robed man smiled and said, unfortunately, fate makes fools of people. This Xian Ke fell in love with the vermilion bird at first sight, and gave birth to the first flame clan in the world. End of chapter. Chapter 3349. These ancient secrets of the trichiliocosm, even tracing back to the origin of the myriad races, seemed rather casual when spoken by the black-robed man, as if he was very familiar with them. The black-robed man said, the human race was born weak. Their bloodline and physical body were ordinary, and they did not have the claws and teeth of ferocious beasts. They also did not have the divine power of dragons and elephants. When they were first created, they were at the bottom of the myriad races, and were not thought highly of. However, the human race had endless potential. Although their starting point was low, their final achievements were beyond the myriad races. Often, they could surpass the experts of the 10,000 races. At their peak, there were 3,000 human saints. Moreover, the human race had another characteristic. Their bloodline did not have any attributes, which meant that they could perfectly integrate with other races and give birth to new races. The Yin clan was one of them. Among the myriad races, such as the Protoss, the Thunder clan, the Sun clan, and other races with human forms, half of their ancestors were humans. Wu Dao's original body was shocked. He did not expect the origin of these races to be like this. In other words, when the human race was at its peak in the upper-class world, other than the 3,000 saints, there were also many races related to the human race. The human race, it deeply affected the evolution process of the myriad races. Wu Dao's original body asked, I heard that there were not many humans in the upper-class world. It was far from being like now, when they were all over the trichiliocosm. Because the human race disappointed her a little, the black-robed man said. She wanted to create a perfect race, to change this jungle world where the strong preyed on the weak. She wanted all living beings to be equal. Even the most humble and weakest life should have the dignity to live. She blessed the human race with courage, integrity, kindness, compassion, tenacity, diligence, tolerance, all kinds of beautiful qualities. However, she realized that she could not control these things at all. Even the first generation of humans began to show cowardice, jealousy, arrogance, laziness, greed, and other emotions, let alone the descendants of the human race. Most of the time, the human race is no different from the myriad races. They still have 7 emotions and 6 desires. The human heart is unpredictable, and this world has not become better. Killing and war are still happening in the trichiliocosm every day. Wu Dao's original body was silent. The original intention of this heavenly Dao Saint King was naturally good. But even if she had cultivated to that level, she could not change the world. He still couldn't change the world, and there were still things he couldn't control. This heavenly Dao Saint King. After a long period of silence, Wu Dao's main body asked hesitantly, dead? As if knowing what Wu Dao wanted to ask, the black-robed man softly said 2 words. His tone was calm, and his face was expressionless. His eyes were like an ancient well, without any ripples. But beneath that calm expression, Wu Dao's true body could feel an immense sorrow. This kind of sadness had even suppressed the black-robed man's loneliness. The black-robed man continued. After her death, her flesh and blood were scattered all over the land of the 3,000 worlds, mixing with the soil. Using the last of her strength, she created millions of humans for some reason. Wu Dao felt as if his heart had been struck by something when he heard this. Perhaps it was due to the influence of the black-robed man or something else, but he could not help but feel a sense of sadness. This was why the number of humans had skyrocketed after that great upheaval. Saint King Life had been disappointed and hesitant after creating the human race. But at the last moment of her life, she still chose to continue evolving the human race. Perhaps the self-sacrifice of the 3,000 saints, and the resistance of all living beings against the other saints made her believe that the appearance of the human race, even if it could not completely change the world, could make the 3,000 worlds better. Wu Dao's main body asked, is there no other way to resolve the infinite calamity of all living beings? According to the black-robed man, the infinite calamity of all living beings would still descend one day. Of course, the black-robed man said. What way? Wu Dao's main body asked. The black-robed man remained silent. Do you think this world is fair? After a long while, the black-robed man did not answer. Instead, he asked a strange question. Without waiting for Wu Dao's main body to answer, the black-robed man said, some people are born rich and have no worries about food and clothing, while others can only be poor and have a bumpy road. Some people are talented, while others are stupid and clumsy. Some are born ugly, while others are born beautiful. Is the world fair? The black-robed man asked. Wu Dao's main body frowned slightly. Could it be that everyone had to be equally stupid or equally intelligent from the moment they were born? Was that only fair? Could it be that everyone was born with the same appearance to be fair? The unfairness that the black-robed man said was innate fate and could not be changed. However, if one was born rich, they could also lose all their wealth. If one was poor, they could also ascend to the throne and become an emperor. Born as a mayfly, one's lifespan is less than a day. Saints of the great Tao. Their hands are bloody, but they can live forever. Saints have endless lifespans, their bloodlines are endless, their families are prosperous, and they monopolize more and more resources. The survival of the later generations becomes more and more difficult, but they are powerless to change. Is the world fair? The black-robed man asked again. Wu Dao's main body was silent. The black-robed man asked again. Is all living beings equal? Wu Dao's main body shook his head and said, the vast grass is destined to be eaten by cows and sheep will inevitably be hunted by tigers and leopards. Not to mention these living beings, even people of the same race are often divided into different grades and ranks according to their status. It's easier said than done to make all living beings equal. According to the black-robed man, all living beings being equal was a scene that the Holy King of Life had hoped for. However, it was too difficult to achieve. That's right, the black-robed man said indifferently. There are all kinds of unfairness in the world, and all living beings are born unequal. But the 3,000 worlds should be fairer, and all living beings should be more equal. What are you going to do? Wu Dao's main body frowned and asked. A wisp of cold light flashed through the black-robed man's eyes, and he said slowly, no matter if you were born rich or poor, no matter if you're ugly or beautiful, no matter if you're smart or slow-witted, no matter if you're a mayfly or a saint. Only death is the greatest fairness, the final equality. Wu Dao's main body was shocked. He finally realized what the black-robed man was going to do. He also finally understood what the black-robed man was talking about to resolve the infinite calamity of all living beings. Destroy saints. Since the root of the infinite calamity of all living beings was the immortality of saints, causing the power of the universe to be imbalanced, then all saints would be destroyed. Although saints were powerful and looked down on all living beings, they could not escape death like mayflies. The black-robed man said coldly, all living beings of all races have to experience death and enter the cycle of reincarnation. Those who do good will enter the upper 3 Daos, which are the heavenly Tao, human Tao, and Shura Tao. Those who do evil will enter the lower 3 Daos, which are the ghost Tao, beast Tao, and hell Tao. Saints are no exception. When saints do evil, they have to enter the lower 3 Daos and experience the pain of reincarnation. The human heart is unpredictable, but there are gods 3 feet above. This god is the 6th Daos of reincarnation, under the illumination of the gods, who dares to do evil. Chapter 3350. What great ambition! What great boldness! If the black-robed man could do as he wished, there was indeed a kind of fairness in this world, and that was death. It could also achieve a kind of equality. All living beings had to die and enter the cycle of reincarnation. No matter how rich you were in life, no matter how powerful you were, even if you had thousands of miles of land, a harem of 3,000, or become a saint and look down on the world, you would still have to experience death in the end. Endure reincarnation. In the face of death, there was no such thing as wealth or status. All living beings were the same, the 6 paths of reincarnation. Of course, it was impossible to cut off all evil in the world, but when someone did evil, they had to have some scruples and restrain themselves. In fact, the evil lord's thoughts were the same as the black-robed man's. The evil lord hated evil. She was in charge of the beast path and wanted to punish evil. The black-robed man's 6 paths of reincarnation went one step further, adding the heavenly path, human path, and Shura path to allow those who did good to have a good home. Although he did not directly ask the identity of the black-robed man in front of him, Wu Dao already had an answer in his heart. Wu Dao's main body was silent for a moment, then asked, in that case the demon lord, evil lord, Brahma Ghost's mother, and Lord of Hell all listen to you? I'm not really following orders, the black-robed man said indifferently. It's just that we all have the same goal. I did teach the demon lord, Brahma Ghost Mother, and Hell some skills. As for the evil lord, after a pause the black-robed man said, that life Saint King had 2 disciples when she was alive. One of them is the evil lord, and you know the other. Wu Dao's main body pondered for a moment, then a thought flashed through his mind. He blurted out, Saint Guyao. Back then, when Saint Guyao met him, she had said that there were 2 dream tokens, given by one person. She and Asia each held 1 token. Now it seemed that this person was the life Saint King. That's right. The black-robed man nodded and said, Xian Ku was the first human woman she created. She has very special feelings for Xian Ku. And Guyao was born from Xian Ku. Under Xian Ku's pleas, she did not refuse. Take her as your disciple. Wu Dao's main body was silent. The rift between Saint Guyao and the ancestral flame sacred lord was probably not only because of Saint Xuanpin's death, but also because of the master-disciple relationship between her and the life-sacred king. Saint Guyao was caught in the middle. One could only imagine the torment and pain she was in. It was not hard to imagine that her mother, Saint Xianpin, had experienced the same thing back then. On one hand, the life Saint King had given her life. On the other hand, she was the Tao companion of Sacred Master Ancestral Flame. The death of Saint Xianpin back then. Wu Dao's main body asked hesitantly. The black-robed man said, back then, the destruction of the 3 sacred lands was a foregone conclusion. Although Xian Ku was the Vermilion Bird's Tao partner, she still had feelings for the Valley God and the life-sacred land. In the end, she committed suicide in front of the Vermilion Bird and the other sages. A life for a life, to ensure the survival of the goddess of grains. The eyes of Wu Dao's main body flashed with a trace of sadness, and he sighed softly. The goddess of grains and Xian Ku were the first human couple born in the world. They should have been together. Perhaps the life Saint King's initial hope was to grant the 2 of them their wish. Unfortunately, fate made fools of people. In the end, feelings could not be forced. Perhaps in Saint Xianpin's heart, her feelings for the mountain elder were mixed with a trace of guilt. That was why she made the final decision. When Su Zimo was a child, he had once read a sentence at the end of a book. If the person you loved deeply fell in love with someone else, what could you do? Wu Dao's main body finally understood why the mountain elder had such a sad appearance. Even if he smiled in front of everyone, the underlying color of that smile was still sadness. The mountain elder had survived, but his life had been exchanged with the life of the person he loved deeply. To him, wasn't this also a kind of pain? The destruction of the 3 sacred lands was already irreversible. Saint Xianpin saving the mountain elder's life was probably the limit of what she could do. Saint Xianpin was not only the Tao companion of Sacred Master Ancestral Flame, but she was also the first human woman created by the life Saint King. It was also because of this special status that she was able to save the mountain elder in that situation. It had to be known that the good fortune Saint Lord had already perished. All that remained of the Samsara Saint Lord was a wisp of his remnant soul. He could only stay in the Netherworld Kingdom. Of the 3 holy lords, only the mountain elder was still alive. Moreover, in this life, he had once again become a great saint. Wu Dao's main body recalled this ancient secret from over 6 billion years ago. Unable to calm down for a long time, Chaos Qinglian was destroyed. After she perished, she left behind 4 lotus flowers. But when the life Saint King perished, her flesh and blood evolved into tens of thousands of humans. In a sense, as long as humanity wasn't destroyed, her mark would always exist in the 3,000 worlds. Perhaps this was a continuation of life in another way. I must leave. The black-robed man slowly stood up. He looked up into the skies, his gaze seeming to pierce through infinite space and fall upon the boundless universe. When the black-robed man's aura rose, Wu Dao's main body had a premonition that this person would leave soon. The strength that came from the boundless universe was no longer a threat to him. It was also because of this that the black-robed man spoke so many words to him before he left. The black-robed man turned back and took a deep look at Wu Dao's main body. Under his gaze, Wu Dao's main body felt that he had no secrets. It seemed that even the Yuanwu world couldn't hide from the black-robed man's eyes. The black-robed man didn't say anything. He only chuckled. Even if one cultivates to the heavenly Dao Saint King level, including the Taisher primordial spirit, it is difficult to erase all traces. The black-robed man said. When Chaos Qinglian perished, other than her flesh and blood transforming into 4 lotus flowers, her soul didn't dissipate. Instead, she entered the cycle of reincarnation and experienced many reincarnations. You have seen 2 of them reincarnated. Wu Dao's main body was shocked. Since Chaos Qinglian's soul hadn't dissipated and entered the cycle of reincarnation and reincarnated, all of this naturally couldn't be hidden from the black-robed man. Wu Dao's main body wasn't surprised by this. However, he hadn't expected that he would have seen 2 of Chaos Qinglian's reincarnations. Wu Dao's main body tried his best to recall, but he couldn't figure it out. Which 2 are they? Wu Dao's main body could not help but ask. The black-robed man said. One of them is the mystic lady of the 9 heavens, and the other is the 9 nether pure maiden. Wu Dao's main body was enlightened. It was no wonder why the mystic lady of the 9 heavens and the 9 nether pure maiden looked at Qinglian's main body with strange gazes back in the dream token. That was the reason, the black-robed man continued. However, every time it reincarnated, it consumed the power of the soul. After many reincarnations, the soul of the chaotic green lotus was no longer able to maintain the fusion, so it dispersed for the last time. Her soul fused into a dream body, while her soul fused into another soul, and reincarnated into 2 people. You've seen the 2 of them before as well. Wu Dao's main body was shocked and thought of a possibility. However, he still asked instinctively, who are they? The Ji sisters of Tianhuang mainland. With that said, the black-robed man soared into the air and tore open a gigantic dimensional tear with his bare hands, entering it. Rumble. Boom. A violent tremor came from the skies above the netherworld blood sea. The netherworld turned into a wisp of black light and disappeared into the dimensional tear, along with the black-robed man. Chapter 3351. A long time after the black-robed man left, Wu Dao's true body gradually regained his senses and sighed. To think that Ji Yaoshue and Demoness Ji would have such a connection with Chaos Qinglian. It was no wonder why Demoness Ji could obtain the inheritance of the 9 nether pure maiden back then. The 9 heavens mystic maiden and 9 nether pure maiden had both attained their Dao as emperors. What was left in the dream token should be their own souls. As for Chaos Qinglian's soul, it continued to undergo reincarnation. He possessed the Chaos Qinglian's body. The Ji sisters were the reincarnation of Chaos Qinglian's soul. There was an unforgettable bond between the 3 of them. Now that he thought about it, it might have been fate. Wu Dao's true body's heart skipped a beat as he thought of another matter. With Saint Guyao's cultivation base, if she could create an illusory body, she should not have done it casually. The black-robed man had just said that Chaos Qinglian's soul had fused with another soul and reincarnated into Demoness Ji. That soul might have something to do with Saint Guyao. In the forbidden ground of time and space, Saint Guyao had revealed a name in her conversation with the mountain elder, Yanji. After Demoness Ji ascended, no one knew where she went. Wu Dao's true body could not help but think of a possibility. This matter could only be verified in the future. Wu Dao's true body moved and left the holy ground. Stepping on the blood sea, he arrived at the edge of the blood sea in the blink of an eye. He had just tried to leave the netherworld blood sea when that sense of danger appeared once more. Wu Dao's true body did not force it. Instead, he sat quietly at the edge of the blood sea. He was waiting for someone, for had already left. The netherworld had also disappeared with the black-robed man. There was no need for Kitsune to stay in the medium-class realm. Before long, Kitsune arrived. Master, Kitsune said, the netherworld has suddenly disappeared. I don't know where it went. Wu Dao's main body nodded and said, you don't have to guard the middle world anymore. The threat from the underworld has already disappeared. Prepare to ascend. Wu Dao's original body gave a few more instructions and introduced the situation of the Great Thousand World to Kitsune. Only then did he return to the holy ground. Now he was the only one left alive. The only things that accompanied him were the piles of bones around him and the endless sea of blood. Wu Dao's true body wanted to continue divining Wu Dao. From the black-robed man's conversation, Shaochen learned about the origins of the 3,000 realms. This allowed Wu Dao's true body to gain a new understanding of his Yuanwu realm. Even if he had set up 3,000 great Daos in the Yuanwu world and created an alternate world, it would still be inferior to the 3,000 worlds he was in. He was too weak. The current trichiliocosm had evolved for countless billions of years. Even if the Yuanwu world continued to perfect the foundation of the 3,000 great Daos and evolve living beings, it was impossible for it to be on par with the 3,000 great Daos. His highest achievement was a small 3,000 worlds, but he was still suppressed by the 3,000 worlds' nomological power. It was no different from the Heaven and Earth creation painting. Heaven and Earth creation painting. Wu Dao's true body muttered softly deep in thought. He had a vague idea in his heart. However, the prerequisite was that he had to continue perfecting the Yuanwu world. Space-time forbidden zone. After the Book of Human merged with the Book of Life and Death, it underwent a transformation. Its aura increased greatly, and it was on par with the two heavenly Dao Saint artifacts. With the Book of Human in hand, the Mountain Elder quickly stabilized the situation. It would be difficult for the space-time and yin-yang sacred lords to break through the Mountain Elder's defenses in a short period of time. Furthermore, the evil lord was supporting them from the side. Of course, if this stalemate continued, it would be extremely disadvantageous for the Mountain Elder and the evil lord. After all, of the 5 sacred lords, other than the ancestral flame sacred lord who had left, there were still 2 who had yet to appear. As long as one more sacred lord made a move, they would be able to instantly break the balance and change the battle situation. 4 great sages and 3 heavenly Dao Saint artifacts clashed continuously in the space-time forbidden zone, shattering this world into pieces. The Stone of Life had already merged with the Book of Human, constantly repairing this world. Suddenly, a violent tremor came from the Great Thousand World. It was as if the world had been turned upside down. A terrifying aura suddenly descended and then disappeared. Whether it was the space-time and yin-yang sacred lords in the space-time forbidden zone, or the 3 sacred lords of Tian Fa, ancestral flame, or Nirvana, they were all shocked at this moment. This aura. Could it be that he is still alive? This thought flashed through the minds of the 5 sacred lords. Their faces turned pale, and a trace of fear flashed past their eyes. The heavenly Dao Saint artifact in the Tian Fa sacred ground let out a series of dragon roars. Lightning flashed all over its body, and it released streaks of heavenly tribulation that fell on the Great Thousand World. In an instant, lightning covered the entire sky, as if it wanted to destroy everything in the world. Even the Tian Fa sacred lord could not control it. After a long while, the heavenly Dao Saint artifact still could not find its target. The violent aura gradually calmed down. Su Zimo realized that the black-robed man had just descended on the Great Thousand World. However, the black-robed man did not show himself. His aura also disappeared in a flash. However, just a single strand of aura that leaked out was enough to turn the Great Thousand World upside down. Even the 5 great saint masters revealed looks of horror. Rumble. Suddenly, just as the battle in the space-time forbidden zone paused for a moment, because of this change, a thick, hairy arm that exuded a savage aura descended from the sky like a pillar to the heavens. It opened its huge hand and grabbed at the monkey on the ground. Under the pressure of the 3 heavenly Dao Saint artifacts, even the 9 heaven sages could not move. However, this huge hand was able to force its way in. The monkey Su Zimo, Night Spirit, and the others stood together. Everyone felt their vision darken. They could not help but feel that something was wrong. When the monkey saw this huge hand, a trace of excitement flashed past his eyes. He sent a voice transmission. "Big brother Night Spirit, don't be afraid. It's Master." The space-time sacred lord, yin-yang sacred lord, mountain elder, and evil lord naturally recognized the owner of this hairy hand immediately. The chaotic world great sage. This chaotic world demonic ape was one of the 9 chaotic sacred spirits that had attained the great Tao when this chaotic world was first formed. During the great turmoil back then, this chaotic world demonic ape had not been involved and had luckily survived. Regardless of whether it was the 5 sacred lords or the 4 Tao masters, no one was willing to make an enemy out of such a neutral great sage. Earlier on, the 9 heaven sages had declared that they would keep Su Zimo and Night Spirit, but not the monkey. This was also because they were wary of the chaotic world great sage. The chaotic world great sage did not reveal himself. Instead, he took advantage of the chaos to take the monkey away from this dangerous place. The monkey sensed the chaotic world great sage's intention and was anxious. He hurriedly sent a voice transmission. "They are my sworn brothers who have gone through life and death with me. Master, please take them away with you." The current situation was unclear. If Su Zimo and Night Spirit were to stay here, no one knew what the consequences would be. The hairy hand paused slightly, as if hesitating. When the monkey saw this, he beat his chest and stomped his feet. He bared his teeth and shouted, "If you don't take them away, I won't leave either. I won't learn your skills from now on. You little monkey, you're really good at acting." Outside the sky, the chaotic world great sage cursed a few times. The hairy hand grabbed Su Zimo, the monkey, and Night Spirit, and quickly left the forbidden land of time and space. Chapter 3352. Before Su Zimo could react, his vision turned black, and he had already fallen into the great sage's palm. With a wave of dizziness, Su Zimo realized that he was being taken out of the forbidden zone. "Oomph!" A cold and dignified voice suddenly sounded. "Hold him!" Boom! 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 Su Zimo and the other 2 were held in the great sage's palm. Their surroundings were airtight, and their vision and consciousness were blocked. They could not see what was happening outside at all. They could only hear an earth-shattering sound. The newcomer must be fighting the great sage of chaos. To be able to fight against a great sage, it should have been a holy lord. As a great sage, and one of the 9 chaos sacred spirits, Su Zimo believed that the great sage of chaos was definitely not weaker than the sacred lord outside. However, the 5 sacred lords each had a heavenly Tao sacred artifact. He had witnessed the terror of a heavenly Tao sacred artifact in the forbidden zone. A single heavenly Tao sacred artifact was enough to change the situation. As expected, just as this thought flashed through Su Zimo's mind, he felt a violent tremor. The great sage of chaos's muffled groan sounded beside his ear, as if he had suffered a huge blow. Su Zimo and the other 2 were protected in the great sage of chaos's palm. Even though they were in the storm of a battle between great sages, they were not injured at all. However, the 3 of them could clearly feel that the great sage of chaos's arm was trembling slightly. Moreover, the great sage of chaos's fist was clenched weakly, revealing a few gaps between his fingers. Even with thick hair covering it, Su Zimo and the other 2 could still smell the intense stench of blood. The great sage of chaos was injured. "Chaos, it's one thing for you to take away that monkey, but you actually want to take away Araki Takeshi and this sacred race traitor? You're quite bold." The cold voice sounded again. Through the gaps between his bloodstained fingers, Su Zimo and the other 2 could vaguely see a white-robed figure standing in the air opposite the great sage of chaos. He had a cold killing intent and held a snow-white silver spear, pointing it at the great sage of chaos. Heavenly Tao sacred artifact, saint-slaying spear. Night Spirit suddenly said, "It's the Holy Lord of Nirvana." The great sage of chaos did not back down and said, "Little tiger, if you have the guts, throw away that saint-killing spear and have a good fight with me." The true form of the Nirvana Holy Lord was the white tiger Holy Spirit of the 4 symbols. "Oomph!" The Nirvana Holy Lord snorted coldly and was about to retort when the great saint of chaos cut in. "You're just relying on a heavenly Tao saint weapon. We both know that. So why are you still trying to act all high and mighty in front of me? If you throw away the heavenly saint artifact, you are nothing. I can ride on you and beat you into a dragonly." Su Zimo was stunned. Night Spirit was stunned when he heard that. Monkey was a little embarrassed and said, "Master is like that. He doesn't know what to say and is frivolous. He often hides his identity and roams the mortal world. When he encounters conflicts, he doesn't want to use his cultivation to bully others, so he practices his ability to scold others. After he's done, he'll feel good and turn to run. No one can catch up to him, so he hides in the shadows and watches them go mad with anger. He's secretly amused. In terms of scolding others, the 5 holy lords combined probably can't compare to Master. Master once said that he's never weaker than anyone in terms of words. Su Zimo and Night Spirit looked at each other speechlessly. If the great sage of chaos wanted to run, how many people in the 3,000 worlds could catch up to him? This great saint was truly a maverick, and different from the rest. As a great saint expert, he was almost at the peak of the 3,000 worlds. He didn't put on any airs or dignity, and was unwilling to bully the weak with martial strength. When he encountered a conflict, he would just curse and run, hiding his achievements and fame. The Nirvana Holy Lord couldn't say anything after being scolded by the great sage of chaos. His face darkened. Furious, he raised the saint-killing spear, and charged at the great sage of chaos again, without another word. Boom! The two sides fought again. Although they couldn't see the full picture of the battle between great saints, the 3 of them could clearly feel the great sage of chaos retreating, as they stood in his palm. The stench of blood on the great sage of chaos grew heavier and heavier. If this continued, the great sage of chaos wouldn't be able to hold on at all, and would probably die under the saint-killing spear. Su Zimo and Night Spirit didn't communicate at all, but they made the same decision. The Nirvana Holy Lord's words had actually revealed one thing. If it weren't for Su Zimo and Night Spirit, he wouldn't have stopped the great sage of chaos. It was because of the 2 of them that the Nirvana Holy Lord had taken action. Since that was the case, the 2 of them didn't want to implicate the great sage of chaos, and jumped out from between his fingers at the same time. The void outside had been shattered by the 2 great sages, and there were cracks everywhere. The 2 of them had just arrived on the battlefield when they were almost torn to shreds by the shockwaves. The great sage of chaos hurriedly moved to block the storm of energy that engulfed them. However, he was almost powerless against the Nirvana Holy Lord's ferocious attacks, much less save Su Zimo and Night Spirit. After a brief pause, the 2 of them fell into a space-time crack and disappeared. The Nirvana Holy Lord's eyes were like torches as he forced the great sage of chaos back with a single strike of his spear. At the same time, he reached into the crack and grabbed Night Spirit, ready to bring him back to the Nirvana Holy Land. Night Spirit had betrayed the Nirvana Holy Land and was dead without a doubt. However, his body and blood couldn't be wasted. He could bestow it on his clansmen and try to raise another member of the sacred clan. The Nirvana Holy Lord was about to grab Su Zimo when he frowned. While it was possible to be transported to any place in the boundless universe in a space-time crack, there were still traces to follow. However, he couldn't find any trace of Su Zimo after searching the crack for a moment. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. The Nirvana Holy Lord didn't take it to heart. Araki Takashi had been caught in the aftershocks of the Great Saint's battle as soon as he'd jumped into the battlefield. He probably wouldn't survive. Even if he'd been transported somewhere, he'd be a corpse. Damn it! I can't use my full strength with a burden by my side. Let's fight another day. The great sage of chaos was too heavily injured to continue fighting. He could only flee with the monkey. You want to leave? The Nirvana Holy Lord had no intention of stopping here. Not so easy, he said coldly. The Nirvana Holy Lord temporarily restrained Night Spirit and chased after the great sage of chaos's aura with the Saint Killer spear in hand. More than 6 billion years ago, the great sage of chaos had been neutral and hadn't been involved in the great upheaval. However, the battle just now made the Nirvana Holy Lord realize that the great sage of chaos might not be neutral in this generation. Moreover, the great sage of chaos had been injured by him today. It was very likely that the great sage of chaos would side with the 4 Tao Masters. Since that was the case, the Nirvana Holy Lord would use this opportunity to get rid of this hidden danger and prevent other variables from appearing in the future. Filled with killing intent, the Nirvana Holy Lord gave chase. Meanwhile, the battle between the 4 great saints in the forbidden zone of time and space had yet to end. The Mountain Elder had the Book of Man and temporarily stabilized the situation. However, the Sacred Lords of Time and Space and Yin had 2 heavenly Tao artifacts. They gradually gained the upper hand. It was only a matter of time before they defeated the Mountain Elder and suppressed the evil lord. End of chapter. Chapter 3353. Su Zimo had been heavily injured by the shockwaves of the battle between great saints. He'd only been hanging on by a thread thanks to the powerful vitality of Qinglian's true body. When he'd been sucked into the space-time crack, his consciousness had blurred. This was the most serious injury he'd suffered since ascending to the multiverse. If he hadn't merged with the 3 lotuses, he probably would have died already. And this time, the danger had come from the sacred masters. The difference between them was too great. Su Zimo was only at initial success in the Tao control realm. He couldn't withstand this kind of injury at all. However, when he arrived at the space-time crack, the 2 godstones that had been silent since the appearance of the Yin-Yang sacred master suddenly burst forth with power and pulled Su Zimo's body into the space-time tunnel. Yin and Yang intertwined, destroying Su Zimo's remaining presence and traces. When the Nirvana sacred master captured the night spirit and wanted to capture Su Zimo again, he'd already lost track of him. While Su Zimo was dazed, the bloodline of Qinglian's true body circulated slowly and repaired his battered body. The 2 godstones also flowed with the power of Yin and Yang and filled Su Zimo's body, doing their best to maintain his vitality. Moreover, Su Zimo could faintly sense that the 2 godstones seemed to have brought him to a strange space. He was wrapped in a warm current that was extremely comfortable. Though his eyes were closed and his consciousness was weak, he could still sense light and darkness alternating around him. 2 types of extremely dense power were furiously converging on Zhu Zhao and Yu Ying and surging into his body. Under the nourishment of these 2 types of power, not only did Zhu Zhao and Yu Ying's auras skyrocketed, even his injuries were healing at a visible rate. This was the extremely pure power of Yin and Yang. When Yin and Yang came together, life flourished. Su Zimo was rapidly waking up. His bloodline circulated faster and faster, and the great Tao of chaos manifested. His cultivation was also rising steadily. Under the nourishment of the power of Yin and Yang, his strength rose rapidly as well, and he advanced towards an extremely crucial level of cultivation. At this moment, Su Zimo was still unaware that various strange phenomena were occurring in the great wide world while he was healing. Originally, the great wide world alternated between light and darkness every 12 hours. But all of a sudden, the greater thousand world was divided into 2 areas of light and darkness. As time passed, the 2 areas of light and darkness kept changing and chasing each other. In the area of light, a bit of darkness gradually appeared. In the dark area, a ball of light gradually burst forth. The entire greater thousand worlds had almost evolved into a gigantic Taiji yin-yang diagram. All the beings of the myriad races were shocked to see this. Everyone subconsciously assumed that this was a result of the battle between great sages. In the forbidden land of time and space, the yin-yang Saint Lord seemed to have sensed something. His expression changed as he looked in the direction of the yin-yang sacred land and frowned. Something happened to the Holy Land, the yin-yang Saint Master said in a low voice. I have to go back and take a look. However, he did not sense any top experts coming to the yin-yang sacred land. But the 2 yin-yang seas of the yin-yang sacred land seemed to have encountered something and were rapidly drying up. You want to leave at such a critical moment? The space-time Saint Lord was a little anxious when he heard this. He could not help but shout. If he teamed up with the yin-yang Saint Lord and used the 2 heavenly Tao Saint artifacts, they would naturally be able to suppress the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. But if the yin-yang Saint Lord left, he would be left alone to face the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. He would not be able to withstand the combined forces of the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. Instead, he would be at a disadvantage. The yin-yang Saint Lord hesitated. If he left now, he would be letting the space-time Saint Lord down. But the yin-yang sacred land was his foundation. He could not afford to lose it. The space-time Saint Lord said in a low voice, there are still many sages in the yin-yang sacred land. Why are you panicking? Can't you tell which side is more important? The Yin-Yang Saint Lord thought about it and agreed. It would not be too late to return to the Yin-Yang sacred land after suppressing the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. Thinking of this, the Yin-Yang Saint Lord's attacks became more aggressive. He teamed up with the Space-Time Saint Lord and charged toward the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. There were 18 water residences in the north of the Great Thousand World. There were rivers and lakes everywhere, and the Yin-Yang sacred land was the overseer. The Yin-Yang Ocean was the core of the Yin-Yang sacred land. Legend had it that the Yin-Yang Ocean was formed after the turmoil of the Great Thousand World, more than 6 billion years ago. This ocean would change every 12 hours. The alternation of light and darkness in the Great Thousand World originated from the Yin-Yang Ocean. At this moment, the Yin-Yang Ocean was rapidly drying up. The commotion here also alarmed the sages of the Yin-Yang sacred land. What's going on? The Yin-Yang Ocean is drying up. Its power is rapidly depleting. No, it seems like it's being devoured by something. The sages descended above the Yin-Yang Ocean and looked down. The Yin-Yang Ocean was also changing its form. Like the Tai Chi Yin-Yang diagram in the Great Thousand World, the Yin-Yang fish kept spinning and chasing each other, forming a huge whirlpool. Even the sages in the sky could not withstand this power. Their bodies were uncontrollably being pulled into the whirlpool. The sages were shocked. They hurriedly released their saint power to stabilize themselves. There's someone in the center of the whirlpool. One of the sages' eyes lit up as he shouted. The sages gathered their saint power. Their eyes shot out beams of divine light as they looked at the center of the whirlpool in the Yin-Yang Ocean. In the deepest part of the ocean, which was also the center of the whirlpool, a green figure was sitting cross-legged, faintly discernible. It's him, Araki Takashi. He's not dead. He's actually here. The sages were also watching the battle between the great sages in the forbidden land of time and space. Naturally, they knew what had happened there. In the sages' senses, not only was Suzimo not dead, but he had also recovered from his injuries in a short period of time. The aura in his body was rapidly rising and reaching its peak. How is this possible? How did he recover from his injuries in such a short period of time? And he can even absorb such a huge amount of power from the Yin-Yang Ocean? One of the sages noticed the two balls of black and white divine light in Suzimo's eyes. He seemed to have thought of something and was shocked. He could not help but exclaim, "What's wrong?" The other sages asked. "They're back." The sage swallowed his saliva. His face was pale, and there was deep fear in his eyes. Who's back? Do you still remember how this Yin-Yang Sea was formed? One of the sages suddenly asked. This seemed to have touched on a taboo in the Yin-Yang sacred land. The other sages could not help but shudder. That's the Yin-Yang Ocean that evolved from the flesh and blood of the two chaos holy spirits in the sacred land. You mean? That's right. Only they can absorb the power of the Yin-Yang Ocean in such a short period of time. Because this Yin-Yang Ocean was originally their flesh and blood. End of chapter. Chapter 3354. The power of the Yin-Yang Ocean was enormous. In a moment, it was all devoured by the two divine stones, Zhujiao and Yuing. The Yin-Yang Ocean had dried up. Most of the power had fused into the Zhujiao and Yuing godstones. Only a small part of the power entered Suzimo's body. But even so, Suzimo's cultivation level rose rapidly in a short time. Boom! A loud sound came from Suzimo's body. He had broken through and his aura soared. He had reached the greater Tao manipulation realm and become a supreme venerable. The increase in cultivation level was secondary. The most important thing was his primordial spirit. His primordial spirit had reached the peak of the Tao manipulation realm, the supreme venerable level. This time, under the nourishment of such pure yin and yang energy, the boost brought about by the breakthrough in his cultivation had soared, and he had finally broken through the threshold of the saint realm. However, although the two divine stones Zhujiao and Yuing had absorbed the Yin-Yang Ocean and awakened their consciousness, they were still unable to merge and become saints. He could clearly sense that the great Taos of the illumination and nether glow divine stones were restricted and could not be fused. After talking with the black-robed man, he had already guessed the origin of Zhu Zhao and Yuing. The black-robed man had said that there were originally 9 chaotic holy spirits in the 3,000 worlds. More than 6 billion years ago, the Yin Holy Spirit and the Yang Holy Spirit had died. Seeing the reactions of Zhu Zhao and Yuing, he could almost conclude that the Yin Holy Spirit and the Yang Holy Spirit were Zhu Zhao and Yuing. Since they were chaotic holy spirits, it meant that Zhu Zhao and Yuing were once supreme venerables. But now the 2 holy spirits could not merge. Su Zimo realized that after the 2 holy spirits died, the Yin Great Tao and the Yang Great Tao were empty and had been merged by other saints. What are you panicking for? Taiyin Saint looked coldly at Su Zimo, who had just broken through, and said, "This guy is just a supreme venerable. Just kill him." "That's right," Taiyin Saint said. "With us occupying the Yin Great Tao and the Yang Great Tao, the 2 chaotic holy spirits will not be able to return to their peak." In the Yin-Yang sacred ground, the Taiyin Saint and the Taiyin Saint had the highest status. These 2 were the first Taiyin and Taiyin tribe to be born in the world. When the saints heard that, they nodded secretly and quickly calmed down. Right then Su Zimo, who was below, suddenly opened his eyes. His black and white pupils stared fixedly at the 2 saints of Supreme Yin and Supreme Yang in midair. With the existence of Zhu Zhao and Yuing among the hundreds of sages, Su Zimo immediately sensed these 2 sages who controlled the Great Tao of Yin and Great Tao of Yang. Boom! A sage made his move. His holy power surged and pressed down on Su Zimo. Crash! Su Zimo's blood essence surged, and the creation Qinglian, red lotus of karmic fire, and golden lotus of virtuous virtue materialized. The Zhu Zhao and Yuing materialized the Tai Chi divine art, and the Tai Chi divine art. The sage's expression changed. How could this be? When the saints merged with the Tao, the saint was the Tao. Everyone below the saint level was an ant. All living beings had to live and act under the rules of the 3,000 great Taos. Experts below the level of saints were no match for saints at all. But at this moment, Su Zimo's appearance broke this boundary. Su Zimo, who was at the phenomenal success stage of the Tao manipulation realm, was still unable to reach Tao integration. Even so, with the chaos Great Tao he controlled, coupled with the chaos Qinglian's bloodline phenomenon, and the power of the Zhu Zhao and Yuing, it was difficult for a single sage to suppress him. After all, he has the bloodline of the chaos Qinglian. Taiyin sage snorted and said, "Everyone, let's attack together and kill him to prevent future trouble." Under the orders of the Tai Yin and Tai Yang sages, hundreds of sages from the Yin-Yang sacred land attacked at the same time. In an instant, many great Taos appeared, crisscrossing in the sky. They contained an unstoppable aura and pressure that enveloped down. The surging holy power was suffocating. No matter how strong Su Zimo's body and bloodline were, Qinglian's true body had not grown to its peak, and the difference between their cultivation realms was too great. Facing the attacks of hundreds of sages, the 3 lotus phenomena were instantly shattered. In the forbidden land of time and space, just 1 sage of the 9 heavens was enough to kill Su Zimo. Moreover, there were hundreds of sages in front of him. However, Su Zimo's essence soul had already stepped into the sage stage. His sage stage essence soul could clearly sense that the Avicii and Netherworld swords contained even more terrifying power. However, due to his cultivation realm, he could not use it. Now with his sage stage essence soul, he could try to use it. At that thought, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. He took out the Avicii and Netherworld swords. Holding the swords with both hands, he merged into the Taiji divine diagram. He spun the Avicii and Netherworld swords and slashed at the many great Taos in the sky. Boom! With a loud bang, heaven and earth shook. The hundreds of sages trembled. Su Zimo's figure holding 2 swords also appeared. Time seemed to have stopped. After a short pause, the Avicii and Netherworld swords tore open a gap in the inescapable net formed by hundreds of great Taos. Su Zimo escaped. The sage's expressions changed. Those 2 swords could actually tear open a gap in the holy power condensed by hundreds of sages. "We can't let him go," the Sun Sage roared. Su Zimo originally planned to escape far away, but when he heard this, he suddenly turned around. His eyes were like torches as he stared at the two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang, with a strong killing intent. The two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang wanted to kill him, and he had the same idea. Only by killing the two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang would Zhu Zhao and Yuang have a chance to become sages and recover to their peak. Kill! Su Zimo roared. Holding the Avicii and Netherworld swords, he took advantage of the chaos in the hundreds of sages' formation to rush in front of the two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang, and slashed with his swords. How dare you! The two sages were shocked and furious. They quickly attacked and took out their sacred artifacts. Clang clang! Two ear-piercing sounds rang out. The two sacred artifacts had just been taken out when they were broken by the Avicii sword. The Netherworld sword waved its sword, and killing intent surged and gushed out. In the eyes of the two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang, they saw a scarlet sea of blood that emitted a strong smell of blood. In the sea of blood, blood-colored human faces appeared. They were all sages who had fallen many years ago. These sages seemed to have turned into ghosts as they charged over. The two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang were shocked. Under the influence of the Netherworld sword's killing intent, their minds suffered quite a bit of impact. More importantly, the Great Tao of Yin and Great Tao of Yang that they controlled were obviously affected by Su Zimo's gaze. They could not display their peak strength. Under this situation, the Netherworld sword slashed down. The two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang were cut in half. Blood spurted out, and the sage's blood dyed the sky red. The Avicii sword pierced through the air and directly imprisoned the primordial spirits of the two sages, suppressing them in the Avicii hell. As long as the Great Tao was not destroyed, the sages would not die. Even if the primordial spirits of the two sages of extreme yin and extreme yang were killed, they could still use the Great Tao to revive. Since that was the case, it was better to suppress the primordial spirits of the two sages in the Avicii sword first, making them beg for death. In the future, when Su Zimo controlled the power of the Great Tao of Destruction, he would completely kill them. End of chapter. Chapter 3355. Space-Time Forbidden Zone. The Yin-Yang Sacred Master, who was fighting with the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord, seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly withdrew from the battlefield and looked in the direction of the Yin-Yang sacred ground with an ugly expression. You're leaving again? The space-time sacred lord frowned as he sensed the Yin-Yang sacred lord's intentions. Araki Takashi is with me, Yin-Yang Saint Lord said in a deep voice. The space-time sacred lord said, there are hundreds of saints over there. Araki Takashi has not yet grown into the complete form of Chaos Qinglian, nor has he stepped into the saint realm. Hundreds of saints are enough to hold him back. It won't be too late for me to return after suppressing the Mountain Elder and the Demon Lord. The Yin-Yang Saint Master said coldly that Araki Takashi has already killed the Tai Yin Saint and the Tai Yang Saint. How many saints will have to die to stall him? As long as the Great Tao exists, the saints will not die. When the space-time sacred lord saw that the Yin-Yang sacred lord was about to leave, he hurriedly advised, the Great Tao of Yin and the Great Tao of Yang are obviously not destroyed. Araki Takashi's strength is not enough to kill a sage. The Yin-Yang Saint Lord sneered and thought to himself, even if the saints don't die, the Yin-Yang sacred land will be massacred by Araki Takashi. Who knows how many saints will be imprisoned by him? After all, Araki Takashi didn't kill a saint in the space-time sacred land. You make it sound so easy. Thinking of this, the Yin-Yang Saint Master made up his mind and said, Araki Takashi is only one step away from the chaotic sacred body. He has the Zhuzhao and Nether Glow. If we don't kill him, he will become a huge threat. You stay here and stall for time. I'll go and kill Araki Takashi to prevent future trouble. After saying that, Saint Master Yin-Yang left. The space-time sacred lord's face darkened. Now that the Yin-Yang Saint Master had left, the pressure on him increased tremendously as he faced the Mountain Elder and the Evil Lord. After the ancestral flame sacred master left, he didn't show himself. Perhaps because of their old relationship, he was unwilling to attack the mountain elder. The heavenly punishment Holy Lord was also delayed for some reason. He didn't appear at all. The Nirvana Sacred Lord had pursued Great Saint of Chaos. Of the 5 Sacred Lords, only the Space-Time Sacred Lord was left to face off against the Mountain Elder and the Demon Lord. If not for the Heaven-Earth mysterious yellow pagoda, he would have been defeated long ago. Yin Yang Sacred Land. After Su Zimo killed the Tai Yin and Tai Yang saints, he trapped their Yuan Shun in the Avicii swords. While the saints were still in shock, he charged out with the Avicii and Netherworld swords in his hands. He had no intention of staying in the Yin Yang Sacred Land. The main reason why he was able to kill the 2 saints of Grand Yin and Grand Yang was because of the Avicii and Netherworld swords, as well as the candle illumination and Nether Ying's suppression of the Great Tao of Yin and Great Tao of Yang. If he were to face hundreds of sages, he would not be able to withstand them at all. After all, his essence soul had only stepped into the saint realm, and his cultivation was only at the greater mastery of the Tao manipulation realm. More importantly, Su Zimo guessed that the Yin Yang Saint Master would definitely come back. Not only because of him, but also because of the Zhu Zhao and Yu Ying, who were once 2 chaos holy spirits. Su Zimo charged out of the Yin Yang Sacred Land. Using his saint primordial spirit, he tore open the void and disappeared into the space tunnel. When the Yin Yang Saint Lord rushed back, Su Zimo had already left. The Yin Yang Saint Lord spread out his consciousness to search the great 1,000 domains for Su Zimo's traces. However, after searching for a while, he still found nothing. His consciousness could cover the entire great 1,000 domains. However, there were still some areas in the great 1,000 domains that his consciousness could not reach. Like the sacred lands, ever since the 4 Tao Masters returned, his consciousness could not enter the 33 heavens. The sky above the void sacred land cracked open, and a green figure with 2 swords descended from the sky with a murderous aura. Su Zimo left the Yin Yang Sacred Land and entered the void to arrive at the void sacred land. After his essence soul entered the saint realm, it brought him another great reward. He sensed the aura of the Black Lotus of Destruction. It was in the west. Saint Gu Yao had once said that the Black Lotus of Destruction was a secret of the sacred lands, and the void sacred land was in the west. Su Zimo had killed the 2 saints of Grand Yin and Grand Yang in the Yin Yang Sacred Land, not only to pave the way for Zhu Zhao and Yu Ying, but also to transfer the Yin Yang Saint Lord away and change the situation in the forbidden zone of time and space. Right now, Great Saint of Chaos was still being pursued by the Nirvana Saint Lord. Night Spirit was also in the hands of the Nirvana Saint Lord. Su Zimo's current strength was not enough to fight a great saint, let alone a heavenly Tao Saint Lord with a heavenly Tao Saint weapon. Therefore, the only way to resolve Great Saint of Chaos's crisis was to divert the Nirvana Saint Lord's attention. The opening of the forbidden zone of time and space had triggered a chain reaction for the various sovereigns to ascend to the Great Saint realm, causing a war between great saints. However, no one could have imagined that a cultivator, who hadn't even entered the sage realm, would somehow influence the outcome of the battle between great sages. Who is it? Many saints of the void sacred land sensed Su Zimo's arrival and appeared one after another. It's him. Araki Takashi is here. Araki Takashi just killed 2 saints in the Yin Yang Sacred Land. Be careful of the sword in his hand. The cries of the various saints rose and fell. Su Zimo didn't say a word. He followed the Black Lotus of Destruction's aura and charged into the sacred land's center before the saints of the void sacred land could gather. The Nirvana Saint Lord, who was fighting Great Saint of Chaos, sensed something and paused. He looked back and frowned deeply. The Black Lotus of Destruction. The Nirvana Saint Lord immediately guessed Su Zimo's intentions. Great Saint of Chaos was covered in wounds, and at the end of his rope. Given a little more time, he would be able to completely suppress him. If he used the heavenly Tao Saint weapon, he might even be able to kill Great Saint of Chaos. However, the Nirvana Saint Lord felt a trace of unease. He realized that if Araki Takashi obtained the Black Lotus of Destruction, it would pose an even greater threat to them. Moreover, Araki Takashi was in the void sacred land right now. Chaos, I'll let you off for now. If you dare spout such nonsense again in the future, I'll kill you." The Nirvana Saint Lord threw down these words coldly and turned to leave. To him, if Araki Takashi obtained the Black Lotus of Destruction, he would pose an even greater threat. Haha. Great Saint of Chaos laughed mockingly and pointed at the Nirvana Saint Lord. "Little tiger, you can't beat me, so you're running away?" In reality, Great Saint of Chaos had been beaten to a pulp, but he still refused to lose in words. The Nirvana Saint Lord narrowed his eyes, killing intent surging. However, after a moment of hesitation, he maintained his rationality and left with a snort. He didn't waste any more time with Great Saint of Chaos. Boom. Just as his figure disappeared into the void, a long staff smashed the spatial tunnel into pieces. Great Saint of Chaos moved again and blocked the Nirvana Saint Lord's path. "You're courting death." The Nirvana Saint Lord's killing intent was almost tangible. The Saint Killer spear in his hand buzzed and trembled as he pointed it at Great Saint of Chaos. Great Saint of Chaos felt his hair stand on end when the Saint Killer spear pointed at him. He could see the situation clearly and guessed Suzumo's intentions. If he did his best to delay the Nirvana Saint Lord, Suzumo would have a chance to obtain the Black Lotus of Destruction and grow into a true Chaos Saint body. "I'm risking my life to help you. Don't disappoint me, kid." The chaotic world Great Saint thought and charged at the Nirvana Holy Lord. End of chapter. Chapter 3356. There was a forbidden area in the void sacred land. Not only were those of the sacred land forbidden from approaching, but even most of the saints were unable to enter. There was an extremely terrifying power of wind in the forbidden area. It was said that this power was extremely ancient, originating from before the 3,000 worlds had been born. Other than the Nirvana Sacred Lord, only saints who cultivated the great Tao of wind, or were related to it, could approach. And the Black Lotus of Destruction was in this forbidden area. Outside this forbidden land, there were several saints guarding it. The leader was the Wind Saint. It had been a long time since an outsider had been able to enter the void sacred land, much less come to this forbidden area. Suzumo didn't fight the saints of the void sacred land. Instead, he charged straight in. He didn't engage in a fight and killed his way to this place. With his current strength, even the Avicii and Netherworld swords might not be able to gain an advantage if he was surrounded by hundreds of saints. To him, the most important thing was to retrieve the Black Lotus of Destruction. Kill. There was almost no exchange of words between the two sides. Suzumo and the Wind Saint fought in front of the forbidden area. It might take some time to suppress all the saints. However, with the support of his nascent spirit and the help of the Avicii and Netherworld swords, it wasn't difficult to break through their blockade. Boom boom boom. Clang clang clang. Great Daos intertwined and holy weapons clashed, erupting with earth-shattering sounds. After a brief exchange of blows, the few saints in front of the forbidden ground could not stop Suzumo at all. They only managed to delay him for a short while. Before the saints of the void sacred land could arrive, Suzumo had broken through the blockade and entered the forbidden area. As for the forbidden area, no one other than the Nirvana Sacred Lord dared to set foot there. The power of wind inside could even tear apart their bodies and destroy their great Daos. The moment Suzumo barged into the forbidden ground, he felt an extremely terrifying power, as every single inch of his flesh was being torn apart. This kind of power came from all directions. His entire body was almost torn to pieces. Even the two godstones, Zhuzhao and Yueying, were unable to withstand this power. Suzumo channeled his bloodline and summoned 3 lotuses from his body. However, as soon as it appeared, it shook and quickly faded away. The wind in the forbidden area was not strong, thus it was not considered a storm. However, when a gentle breeze blew past, Suzumo's body was on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, just as the phenomenon of the 3 lotus flowers rose, another black light soared into the sky. It was rushing towards Suzumo. Black Lotus of Destruction. The 3 lotus flowers resonated with the Black Lotus of Destruction. Although the power of the wind in the forbidden area was terrifying, it did not seem to hinder or harm the Black Lotus of Destruction. Suzumo couldn't move an inch in the forbidden area. On the other hand, The black lotus of apocalypse pierced through the void and arrived in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo opened his eyes and looked over. This was a 12th grade lotus that had grown to its peak. It was completely black and emitted a silent and dark light, as if it could destroy everything. There was no need for Su Zimo to control it. The black lotus of destruction automatically merged with his body and bloodline. It was connected by blood. Qingmian of creation, red lotus of karmic fire, golden lotus of merit, and black lotus of destruction. The 4 lotus flowers have been scattered all over the world for more than 6 billion years, and finally merged into one. Dark light burst forth from Su Zimo's body. His body was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. His injuries were healed. At this moment, Qinglian's true body had truly transformed. Chaotic sacred body. After the black light spread, Su Zimo's body and bloodline began to emit chaotic qi as his cultivation realm rose rapidly. Boom! In the Yin-Yang Sea, he had just broken through to greater mastery of the Tao manipulation realm. However, after obtaining the black lotus of destruction, he broke through again and reached the perfected Tao manipulation realm. At the same time, his essence spirit realm broke through to the saint realm and was comparable to a supreme sage. After attaining the chaotic sacred body, the power in the forbidden area could no longer hurt him. Su Zimo felt that his body was filled with endless power. It was heavy, majestic, and oppressive. It was as if he could shatter the great Tao and blast everything apart with a wave of his hand. The black lotus of destruction is probably going to fall into Araki Takashi's hands. Why didn't the sacred lord carry such a treasure with him? Why did he leave it here? What are you talking about? Who would have thought that the opening of the forbidden area of time and space would cause such a chain reaction? The conditions for the black lotus of destruction to grow are extremely harsh. It can only grow to its peak state in this forbidden area. Moreover, no one would have thought that a supreme sovereign could break through the obstruction of so many saints and enter the forbidden area without the sacred lord. What do we do now? There's no hurry. Let's stay here and wait for the sacred lord to return from suppressing great saint of chaos. Then, we can naturally suppress Araki Takashi. Just as the saints were discussing, an azure figure appeared in the eye of the storm in the forbidden area. This person wore an azure robe. His black hair danced in the wind, and his eyes were like torches. He walked slowly, and with every step, the world trembled and the great Tao wailed. An indescribable pressure. Facing this figure, the hundreds of sages felt a suffocating sense of oppression. The saints' expressions changed drastically. They had only ever felt such a powerful and terrifying aura from the Nirvana Sacred Lord before. Everyone calm down. The Sacred Lord is about to return. The Wind Saint hurriedly shouted to calm the people. Su Zimo smiled faintly, reached out his hand, and grabbed at the Wind Saint from afar. There was still some distance between the two sides. However, this distance seemed to be within reach in Su Zimo's eyes. The Wind Saint saw Su Zimo's hand coming at him, and he hurriedly unleashed his sacred power. Puchi! Sacred blood spurted out. Under everyone's gaze, the Wind Saint was crushed by Su Zimo's hand. Kill! Another great saint with ancestral awakening rushed forward. Su Zimo didn't even look at him. He waved his hand and punched, turning him into a cloud of blood mist. This was the power of the chaotic sacred body. What saint? What ancestral awakening bloodline? They were all fragile in front of the chaotic sacred body. Araki Takashi, what are you doing? One of the saints asked in a trembling voice, his expression fearful. Why, you're really going to fight the Nirvana sacred land? Another saint roared, trying to put on a brave front. Everyone, please come with me. Su Zimo didn't explain anything to them. He attacked the Nirvana sacred land's hundreds of saints again. Boom! 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 The great Tao that had merged with the saints couldn't stop Su Zimo's attacks at all. He hadn't even used the Avicii and Netherworld swords yet, but the hundreds of saints were already scattered and fleeing in all directions. The Nirvana sacred land had never suffered such great destruction and impact. Above the sacred land, a man in blue robes strolled leisurely. Wherever he passed, the saints were bathed in blood, and the great Tao withered. Although the physical bodies of these sages were destroyed, Su Zimo did not destroy their essence spirits. Instead, he imprisoned and suppressed them within the Avicii sword. End of chapter. Chapter 3357. The battle between the space-time Sacred Lord, the Mountain Elder, and the Evil Lord, as well as the Nirvana Sacred Lord and Great Saint of Chaos, caused a huge commotion in the world. Everyone knew that the world was about to face another great upheaval. However, no one could say for sure what the final outcome of this battle would be. The 5 Sacred Lords. Someone else had yet to make a move. Of the 4 Tao Masters, only the Evil Lord had appeared. It wasn't until a wisp of azure light bloomed above the Nirvana Sacred Land that the experts of the myriad races realized that the person who would decide the outcome had appeared. Boom! There was a huge explosion. Great Saint of Chaos fell heavily to the ground. A huge crater was created. The Nirvana Sacred Lord had held on until now with the saint-killing spear in his hand. Great Saint of Chaos struggled to stand up from the crater. His body was covered in wounds and extremely weak. His Tao had been shattered, and he didn't have much combat strength left. However, one of his hands was still clenched, protecting the monkey. He didn't let any harm come to him. Bastard, prepare to die. The Nirvana Sacred Lord's figure flickered. In the next moment, he appeared before Great Saint of Chaos. The saint-killing spear buzzed and trembled, releasing the aura of the Tao of Destruction. Before the saint-killing spear arrived, the surrounding void had already been shattered. The Nirvana Sacred Lord had naturally sensed what was happening in the Nirvana Sacred Land. However, even if he gave up on Great Saint of Chaos and turned back, it was too late. He had to kill Great Saint of Chaos first. Then he would kill Araki Takeshi. Suddenly, an azure figure appeared in the shattered space in front of Great Saint of Chaos. Blood surged and chaos filled the air. He wielded 2 swords and slashed at the saint-killing spear. Su Zimo had arrived. Clang! Spear and sword clashed. Sparks flew everywhere, and an ear-piercing sound erupted. Su Zimo's entire body shook. He almost lost his grip on the Avicii and Netherworld swords, and took half a step back. The Avicii and Netherworld swords hummed and trembled, trying their best to neutralize the impact of the saint-killing spear. Ever since their creation, the Avicii and Netherworld swords had always been successful and destroyed everything. In the end, the Avicii and Netherworld swords were still suppressed by the Heavenly Tao's saint weapon. Of course, the 2 swords were still much stronger than the saint weapons. Heavenly Tao saint weapons of Heavenly Tao weren't damaged. You came at the right time. The Nirvana Sacred Lord's eyes. Murderous intent. Desolate martial, hand over Zhu Zhao and Yu Ying. I'll leave your corpse intact. The Yin Yang Sacred Lord. The Nirvana Sacred Lord. Can you take it? Seeing this, the Great Sage of Chaos was secretly speechless. He sent a voice transmission. Why don't we escape to the 33 heavens? Their combat strength is limited there. The Great Sage of Chaos had witnessed the clash between Su Zimo and the Nirvana Holy Lord. Nirvana, the Nirvana Sacred Elder. To Nirvana Saint 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 Nirvana Divine, Nin Nirvana Sacred Lord. Nirvana Great. Nirvana Nirvana. Avicii and to Nirvana of Nirvana of Avicii. Of the Nirvana of the Nirvana of his Nai. Nirvana. If he was up against 2 holy lords and 2 heavenly Tao saint weapons, Su Zimo had no chance of winning at all. The Nirvana Sacred Lord and the Yin Yang Sacred Lord blocked Su Zimo's path of retreat with the heavenly Tao saint weapons in hand. The 2 Sacred Lords knew that today was the best chance to kill Su Zimo. They would regret it if they missed this opportunity. To Su Zimo, the current situation was even more dangerous than what the Mountain Elder had faced in the forbidden zone of time and space. When the Mountain Elder faced the 2 Sacred Lords, he still had the human book and the Evil Lord by his side. Great Saint of Chaos Sacred Land had lost his ability to fight and couldn't help at all. This meant that Su Zimo would have to face the 2 Sacred Lords alone. The Ancestral Fire Sacred Land. Outside, the battle between the great sages shook the heavens and earth. Meanwhile, the Ancestral Flame Sacred Master was standing in front of a secluded courtyard with a heavy heart. The turmoil in the Great Thousand World made him feel uneasy. Perhaps sensing something, He had something he wanted to say to the people in the courtyard. He was worried that he wouldn't have a chance in the future. Gu Yao. A moment later, the ancestral fire sacred lord said in a low voice. I lost my composure just now and hit you. It's my fault. Please don't blame me. Gu Yao's courtyard was silent. There was no response. The ancestral fire sacred lord sighed softly. I know you still hold a grudge over what happened in the past. Although Yin Ji is dead, she has reincarnated and returned in this life. You've reunited. As for your mother, I didn't expect her to be so strong and resolute. I'm saddened by her death more than anyone else. My sister and I naturally believe you. A clear, pleasant voice sounded with a hint of mockery. Just like your concubines and Dao partners. You'll be sad if they die. The ancestral fire sacred lord stammered. Your mother must be different from them. I don't think so, the voice said again. The voice sounded again and mocked. Back then, it was Mother and Uncle Gu who grew up with us. You spent every day with those concubines and Dao companions, and had long forgotten about us. Yin Ji Yu, the ancestral fire sacred lord was speechless. After a moment of silence he said, as the ancestral fire sacred lord, I'm immortal. It's not a big deal to have multiple wives. Yin Ji said, yes, you can't bear to give up your position and everything. That's why you chose to break up with your mother, and suppress the 3 sacred grounds. I had no choice back then, the ancestral fire sacred lord said. Even if I chose to work with the 3 sacred grounds, I wouldn't be able to change the outcome. I would still be killed, and the ancestral fire sacred ground would be destroyed. Even though I'm a sacred lord, I can't change the situation. Gu Yao Yinji, I'm sorry. The ancestral fire sacred lord's eyes flashed with self-blame. I hope I can make it up to you in the future. I also hope you can forgive me. In front of outsiders, he was an insufferably arrogant saint lord who was respected by all races. But now he only wanted to be a father. The door to Gu Yao's courtyard suddenly opened. Gu Yao Sage and Yin Ji were standing at the door. Yin Ji looked exactly like Demoness Ji of Tianhuang mainland. Demoness Ji still didn't have a good attitude toward the ancestral fire sacred lord. Gu Yao Sage looked calm. Father, you can leave. Gu Yao Sage suddenly spoke. Gu Yao, you're willing to call me father. The ancestral fire sacred lord was overjoyed and couldn't believe it. Ever since Xianmi died, Gu Yao Sage hadn't taken the initiative to meet him or call him father. You're willing to forgive me? The ancestral fire sacred lord asked hurriedly. Gu Yao Sage looked at the ancestral fire sacred lord indifferently, and said calmly, I don't blame or hate you anymore. Naturally, there's no need to talk about forgiveness. The ancestral fire sacred lord seemed to think of something when he saw Gu Yao Sage like that. His heart sank and he asked, Are you going to take that step? It was almost impossible for a saint to take another step forward, especially after the great upheaval, when all the saints had died. No saint in the greater 1,000 worlds could take another step forward and become a supreme saint. But the ancestral fire sacred lord knew that Gu Yao was one of those who could become a supreme saint. And if Gu Yao took that step, it meant that their father-daughter relationship would be severed. You had your difficulties and choices 6 billion years ago, Saint Gu Yao said. Now I'm the same. This is the last time I'll call you father. With that, the door to Gu Yao's courtyard closed again. There were a few mistakes in the previous chapter. The void sacred land had a wind saint, not a supreme saint. End of chapter. Chapter 3358. The Tian Fa Sacred Ground. The Tian Fa sacred leader sat in the main hall and stared at the humming and trembling giant sword floating in the air not far away from him. The giant sword was as tall as a person. It was heavy and surrounded by lightning. It emitted a terrifying aura. This was the Tian Fa Sacred Ground's heavenly law saint artifact, the Tian Fa sword. The Tian Fa sacred leader did not appear because he had temporarily lost control of the Tian Fa sword. Previously, an aura had suddenly descended in the Great Thousand World, causing the world to turn upside down. The Tian Fa sword felt a great threat and unsheathed itself. However, soon after, that aura disappeared. The Tian Fa sword also quieted down. The Tian Fa sacred leader was about to leave the mountain with the sword. The Tian Fa sword seemed to have sensed something, and became violent again. Even he could not suppress it. And this time, the Tian Fa sword's target seemed to be the middle world. The middle world? The Tian Fa sacred leader did not understand. The masters of the four Daos had already ascended. If they were still alive, they should have just descended in the Great Thousand World. What else in the middle world could make the Tian Fa sword so uneasy? The Tian Fa sword even sent several streams of Tian Fa sword into the middle world. But it was like a clay ox entering the sea. It did not cause any waves. The last time the Tian Fa sword was so intense was when the 9 heavens were broken. The Tian Fa sword seemed to have sensed something, and suddenly awakened. It sent Tian Fa straight at the middle world. The Tian Fa sacred leader frowned as he looked at the Tian Fa sword. Without the Tian Fa sword, even if he appeared, he could not change anything. On the contrary, it would be easy to expose himself. Demon Master and Ghost Mother would take advantage of this. In the air, Su Zimo faced the 2 sacred leaders, Yin Yang and Nirvana, who were holding 2 heavenly law saint artifacts. He looked calm, and did not show any signs of fear. Currently, he did not have any chance of winning against the 2 sacred leaders. Even if he had the chaotic sacred body. After all, his cultivation had broken through 2 levels, and was only at the perfected Tao controlling realm. But obtaining the Black Lotus of Destruction had not only brought him an increase in his cultivation level. More importantly, the chaotic green lotus had reappeared on his body, and it was perfect and flawless. This also brought him another important opportunity: break through to the saint realm. Theoretically speaking, any supremes who had cultivated to the peak of the Tao manipulation realm could attempt the Tao unification and break through to the saint realm. However, in reality, very few utmost exalts dared to take this step. Furthermore, they would be incomparably cautious. Firstly, the number of great Tao saint positions was limited. Secondly, he wanted to break through to the saint realm. It was extremely dangerous. Once he failed, he would die and his Tao would vanish. If he remained at the peak of the Tao manipulation realm, at the very least, he would have a lifespan of 10 billion years. It could be said that he was immortal. Su Zimo's situation was different from the other supreme beings. In his previous life, he was one of the 6 great Taisha primordial spirits, primal chaos Qinglian. It was no exaggeration to say that his existence was born for the Tao of chaos. If she hadn't fused with the Black Lotus of Destruction, Chaos Qinglian would have had a natural flaw. If she forcefully tried to break through to the saint stage, she might have failed the Tao unification. Right now, the Chaos Green Lotus was perfect and Su Zimo could take that step to attain Tao integration and become a saint at any moment. There was no need to comprehend. The inherited memories brought by primal Chaos Qinglian were the best experiences. To him, fusing with the Tao of Chaos was a matter of course. Once he stepped into the saint stage, his battle strength would rise to another level. When that time came, he would definitely be able to fight against the 2 primes. Release him, Nirvana Lord. Su Zimo was naturally referring to Night Spirit, who'd been imprisoned by Nirvana Lord. You want me to release him? The Nirvana Sacred Lord asked expressionlessly. Su Zimo flicked his finger gently, and the infinite pain sword vibrated gently, letting out a sword hum. Amidst the humming of the sword, there were also faint howls of grief mixed in. There are at least 100 saints in the Nirvana Sacred Land. Hand over Night Spirit and I won't kill them, Su Zimo said faintly. 100 saints in exchange for 1 Night Spirit. Nirvana Lord had no reason to refuse. However, Su Zimo showed no respect at all. His almost commanding tone only fueled his desire to kill. As long as the Tao exists, saints will not die. The Yin Yang Saint Lord sneered. You haven't entered the saint stage yet. You don't have the power to destroy the Tao and kill saints. Is that so? Su Zimo also smiled. Then I'll kill them for you to see. Before he finished speaking, 2 nascent spirits left the infinite pain sword. Su Zimo controlled the netherworld sword and slashed. Bam bam. The netherworld sword made a strange noise when it hit the 2 nascent spirits. It sounded like a rope breaking. The Yin-Yang Saint Lord could clearly see that the two nascent spirits belonged to the Taiyin and Taiyang saints. When the Netherworld sword cut the nascent spirits of the two saints in half, the Great Tao of Yin and Great Tao of Yang were also broken and destroyed. The power of this slash had destroyed the Great Tao of Yin and Great Tao of Yang. This also meant that the Taiyin and Taiyang saints had completely fallen with the destruction of their Great Tao. With the chaotic saint body and a supreme saint nascent spirit, Su Zimo could destroy Tao and kill saints with the Netherworld sword. How dare you? The Yin-Yang Saint Lord didn't think that Su Zimo would really dare to kill the Taiyin and Taiyang saints in front of him. By the time he realized it, it was already too late. The Nirvana Saint Lord also raised his eyebrows and said coldly, "You're not qualified to ask me for them." Before he finished speaking, the two Saint Lords attacked at the same time. They had already reached an agreement in secret. As long as the two of them attacked together, they wouldn't give Su Zimo a chance to breathe. Even if there were more than 100 saints in the Nirvana sacred land sealed in the infinite pain sword, Su Zimo wouldn't have the chance to destroy Tao and kill saints. The Taiji diagram appeared and covered the sky. The saint-killing spear pierced through the air, tearing apart the Great Tao and piercing through all things. During the conversation with the Nirvana Saint Lord, Su Zimo had been secretly accumulating power. The moment the two Saint Lords attacked, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. He roared and took the crucial step. Tao integration. The Great Tao of Chaos appeared and merged with his body, bloodline, and nascent spirit. The Great Tao resonated and the three realms shook. Boom! An earth-shattering sound came from Su Zimo's body. It was as if some kind of shackle had been broken, and a barrier had been broken. His aura skyrocketed. In the next moment, Su Zimo's figure disappeared. The moment the Taiji diagram and saint-killing spear descended, a jade-green lotus flower filled with chaotic chi shot into the sky and grew in reverse. The Avicii and Netherworld swords circled around this lotus flower. Clang! The Avicii and Netherworld swords clashed with the Taiji diagram and saint-killing spear. Heaven and earth shook and space shattered. The Avicii and Netherworld swords fell onto the Chaos Lotus platform. The Taiji diagram and saint-killing spear's attacks also paused. The chaotic Qinglian swayed gently between heaven and earth. The chaotic chi rippled like the surface of a lake and brushed past the two Saint Lords. Boom! Boom! Two deafening sounds rang out. The two Saint Lords each took half a step back, their expressions changing in shock. In the next moment, Su Zimo's figure appeared above the chaotic Qinglian. His eyes were like torches and his black hair danced in the wind. He held the Avicii and Netherworld swords in his hands and looked down at the two Saint Lords from above. "Now do you have the right?" Su Zimo asked indifferently. End of chapter. Chapter 3359. At this moment, everyone realized that Araki Takashi had merged his Tao and become a Chaos Saint. The balance of power in the world was about to be rewritten. Not only was the sacred land of reincarnation showing signs of resurgence, but the sacred land of reincarnation was also showing signs of resurgence. The mountain elder of the life sacred land had recovered his cultivation. He wielded the heavenly Tao Saint artifact, the mortal scroll. Now even the chaos sacred land had a true master. The three sacred lands that had once been destroyed would rise again. The Yin-Yang Sacred Lord and Nirvana Sacred Lord looked at each other with grave expressions. They both realized that once Araki Takashi entered the Sage Realm, even if they had two heavenly Tao Saint artifacts, they wouldn't be able to suppress him. Perhaps they would only have a chance if the five Sacred Lords worked together. But now that was clearly impossible. The Ancestral Fire Sacred Lord and the Heavenly Punishment Sacred Lord still hadn't appeared. The Space Sacred Lord had to face the Mountain Elder and the Demon Lord alone. Today's matter would likely be left unsettled. More accurately, both the Yin-Yang Sacred Land and Nirvana Sacred Land had suffered a great loss. Because the two Sacred Lords had left, Su Zimo had taken advantage of the situation and turned the two sacred lands upside down. He'd also obtained a great opportunity to enter the Sage Realm and gain the right to negotiate with them. After a moment of silence, the Nirvana Sacred Lord finally released the Night Spirit. Although this was a loss of face and a blow to the Nirvana Sacred Land's reputation, he had no choice but to compromise. Continuing the fight wouldn't do him any good. It was very likely that both sides would suffer great losses. Moreover, one night spirit in exchange for more than 100 saints of the Nirvana Sacred Land wasn't a loss. After rescuing the night spirit, Su Zimo didn't make things difficult for the saints imprisoned in the Avicii sword. The sword trembled and released them. The two sacred lords had their misgivings. Su Zimo was also wary of the 5 Taisha primordial spirits behind the 5 sacred lands. His battle strength hadn't reached its peak yet. It wasn't the right time to fight the 5 sacred lands. Moreover, the demon lord, Brahma Ghost's mother, and the lord of hell hadn't appeared yet. There was also the black-robed man, who descended to the great thousand worlds. After Su Zimo reached the Tao integration stage and became a saint, the various forces maintained a delicate balance. Su Zimo didn't want to break it, yet since the time wasn't right. More than 100 saints returned to the Nirvana Holy Lord's side and took form. The Nirvana Sacred Lord frowned as he swept his gaze over them. There was one less saint. Saint of Wind. Even the Grand Tao of Wind had been destroyed. The Wind Sage was obviously killed by Araki Takashi. A dark look flashed through the Nirvana Sacred Lord's eyes, but he didn't say anything. However, the death of a saint didn't affect the Void Sacred Land's strength much. Even if he asked Su Zimo for an explanation, there wouldn't be any results. The Yin Yang Saint Lord could only accept the fact that the Yin Yang Saint Lord had fallen. Araki Takashi, the trichiliocosm is not as simple as you think. Even if you become a saint, you will die if you choose the wrong side. With that, the Nirvana Sacred Lord led the saints away. The Yin Yang Saint Lord didn't say anything. His figure faded into the void and disappeared. Su Zimo smiled faintly. The Chaos Qinglian beneath him swayed. Chaos energy filled the air and entered the great saint of chaos body, helping him recover. In the next moment, Su Zimo and the others descended into the forbidden land of time and space. At the same time, the Time Sacred Lord led the 9 saints away from the forbidden land of time and space, under the protection of the Xianhuang Pagoda. The Time Sacred Lord also realized that the situation was hopeless. Even the 2 sacred lords of Yin and Yang and Nirvana had no choice but to retreat in front of Araki Takashi. The Time Sacred Lord could only avoid him. Otherwise, he would have to face Araki Takashi, the Mountain Elder, and the Demon Lord. The departure of the Time Sacred Lord meant that the forbidden land of time and space, which used to belong to the Life Sacred Land, was once again under the Mountain Elder's control. After a battle between great sages, this world was almost completely shattered. The Mountain Elder held the Book of Man and activated his nascent spirit. The Book of Man radiated rays of light that entered the world and repaired it as much as possible. In these past years, the human race had been suppressed. The destiny of the human race had also been bound by invisible shackles. At this moment, these shackles had finally been broken. The human sovereigns who had been suppressed for countless years all sensed the opportunity to merge with the Tao and become a saint. And this time, there was no one who could stop them from becoming a saint. Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions came from the bodies of the human sovereigns. In an instant, the resonance of the great Tao resounded through the world, rising and falling in an endless stream. Daiyu also chose to take that step. Just now, she had sensed that the great Tao of Wind's saint seat was empty. The greatest obstacle to becoming a saint had disappeared. This meant that the Saint of Wind had fallen. Daiyu guessed that only Su Zimo would remember her. The 2 divine stones in Su Zimo's eyes, the Torch Illumination and Nether Glow, also chose to merge with the Tao at this moment, regaining control of the great Tao of Yang and the great Tao of Yin. The existences of the Torch Illumination and Nether Glow were somewhat special. Su Zimo had already merged with the great Tao of Chaos. The Torch Illumination and Nether Glow each controlled the great Tao of Yang and the great Tao of Yin. They were no longer compatible with him. However, the Torch Illumination and Nether Glow had always accompanied him throughout his growth and were inextricably linked to him. Now they could be considered to be living in his eyes. An unprecedented wonder appeared between heaven and earth. More than 100 human sovereigns chose to merge with the Tao and break through to the saint stage. Great Taoists appeared in the void one after another, and merged with the human sovereigns. The destiny of the human race that had been suppressed for billions of years was suddenly released at this moment. It was like a volcanic eruption that could not be stopped at all. In less than half an hour, more than 100 humans became saints. Dayu had also successfully merged with the Tao and stepped into the saint stage. The human race will prosper. The human race will prosper. Cheers came from all over Xianmi Mountain. The sovereigns in the forbidden land of time and space had complicated expressions when they saw this scene, and their eyes were filled with envy. Before this, these human sovereigns had almost been completely wiped out and were already struggling on the verge of death. They did not expect the human race to turn the tables and give birth to 100 saints. Fellow Taoists, thank you. Su Zimo looked at the mountain elder, the great sage of chaos, and the evil lord with a smile and cupped his fists slightly. With his current cultivation and combat strength, he was already qualified to be on par with existences like the mountain elder. If not for the mountain elder, the evil lord, and even the great sage of chaos, Qingmian's true body would have died, let alone obtain this opportunity. It's all thanks to you that you've entered the saint stage and forced the sacred lords to retreat. The great sage of chaos was secretly speechless. Otherwise, the few of us wouldn't have been able to escape this calamity today. The mountain elder heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, "After today, there should be a period of peace in the great thousand world." The various factions had their reservations and would not break the balance. Unless, the mountain elder seemed to have thought of something, and a look of worry flashed through his eyes. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.